Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Florida Sound Archive podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Kaiser, and for this episode, this is a first time we are doing a Halloween special. And as the guest for this Halloween special is none other than George Van Orsdel, because he's been in a lot of bands, and we're happy to have him on for this episode because he knows horror and Halloween. George, welcome in. How are you?
Doing good, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I couldn't think of a better guest to have on for this
Thank you.
episode.
That means a lot. That means a lot.
You got the background going on, you got the shirt going on, you got the tattoos going on. So
it's a lifestyle at this point.
It certainly is. So
most of this stuff is year round for me anyway. So
awesome. What is it about it? What is it about Halloween that you just really appreciate, that it is something you appreciate all year?
Yeah, it started off, I guess, like most kids, as a small child. I was just always fascinated by the whole, spooky element of it, and just the whole, I'm very, when I think of Halloween, I'm very nostalgic. I think of like old school Halloween and trick-or-treating with the little, pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns going door to door. That's always been my thing. I've just always loved it as a small child, especially being a small child up north. You see the seasons change and all that stuff. So you really kind of get the whole experience, not so much down here in Florida because it's always just hot down here. So
that's a fact.
Up north, just, the weather, the elements, the changing of the seasons, the whole atmosphere of it. Just, it's something that I've always been fascinated with, even as a little kid.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about your career and the journey you've taken when it comes to music. And we're going to add in a lot of horror related questions, but also they're going to have a tie-in to a lot of the music and things that you've done as well.
Yeah.
So you're in for a treat. I don't know about any tricks, but you're in for some treats.
Well, hopefully no tricks.
Hopefully no tricks. All right. So with that being said, let's take a trip back to the early beginnings. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that you grew up in New Jersey and not Florida. Is that right?
Well, I was born in Jersey City, and we lived in West New York, New Jersey, till about the age of 5. So it was a very small time frame that I lived there. We moved to Miami, actually specifically to Homestead, when I was 6. So essentially, I've been here most of my life. But yeah, I mean, I do have a little bit of time that I did spend there. And there are a lot of, surprisingly, a lot of fond memories, considering, sometimes my memory kind of fails. So, but I do have a lot of memories from the time that I did spend up there. So, yeah, and they're all great memories. They're all fond memories. So
now I know, even only being 5 years old, you could still have some memories going back to that. Do you recall seeing any horror movies at that age?
I did. My parents, they both really loved watching like scary shows. Specifically, there was one, my parents were Cuban immigrants. They came over in the early 60s. But there was this one show on TV that was like a kind of, I guess, for its time, it was, I guess you can compare it to like Tales from the Crypt, because they had like the host, and then they'd have spooky stories to go with the theme of the night. But the show is called La Bruja Maldita, which is, in English it translates to the Wicked Witch. So you would have this witch come out and kind of introduce the story, kind of like the old Tales from the Crypt Keeper used to do, and then the story would proceed. But my parents used to watch that, and I remember watching it with them. I'd be scared because I was like 3-4 years old at the time, but I was just really fascinated by just the whole element of it, and then of course, back then they used to play a lot of the old Universal movies, like, Frankenstein and Dracula and stuff like that on the TV. So yeah, I was exposed to a lot of that stuff early on. And even back then in New Jersey, before I was old enough to even realize what it was, I was watching it, So, and I guess that just kind of ingrained in my mind. I've been a fan since.
It molds the mind very early
Yeah.
on, and it
Oh, absolutely.
sticks with you until you're, you know, up there in
So
years for
my
sure. So we all get there at some point, right? So,
we do, yeah. We just got to enjoy it on the way. That's all.
yeah. So when you got to Miami, what was that like for you and your family at that time?
Well, we moved to Miami, and when we first moved down, we actually lived near the airport at the time for about a year. We didn't move to Homestead till about a year later because my parents bought a house pre-construction, so we had to wait for it to be done. But it was definitely completely different. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, up in New Jersey, you experience the seasons and you experience the snow and the cold and all that stuff, and down here it's just hot all the time. So that was, that took a lot of getting used to. And also living in the city in, West New York, it was a city. We lived across the river from New York City. So there was a lot of hustle and bustle all the time. And then, we moved to Homestead, which at that time, even today, like it's really not a big town, but back then it was even smaller. Um, it was definitely a completely different vibe, man. It was just like very small town, very rural. Um, yeah, I mean, as a kid, you don't really notice it. You don't really like let it affect you too much because you're just kind of doing your thing. Um, but yeah, it was completely different. It was completely different.
And because your parents came over from Cuba, what was some of their musical influences or things that they were playing and listening to at that time?
Well, as a small kid, I remember they didn't really listen to a lot of Latin music. That didn't come until much later, till I was in my like I would say like 10 years old, 11, around that age. But early on, I remember, I guess my dad just really took to like American music, and he would listen to a lot of 50s doo-wop stuff. He was a big Johnny Cash fan. We always had like Nat King Cole and Dean Martin playing on the radio, like the records and stuff like. In fact, I still have a lot of those records now, that I held on to. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff around the house. So that was a lot of the stuff that I was really exposed to really early on. And then eventually my parents discovered the Beatles, and that just kind of stuck with me because ever since I was very young, to this day, I'm still a very big Beatles fan. Um, but yeah, a lot of early stuff. It was like the Latin stuff didn't come in till much later. And even then, when it was played around the house, I didn't really listen to much of it. I would hear it, but I wasn't really into it. Now that I'm older, I kind of appreciate it a lot more.
Right.
But at the time, you're a kid, and it's you want to listen to what you want to listen to, and as kids, a lot of times, even as adults, really, we kind of have like blinders on when it comes to music. Like you only want to listen to what you want to listen to, and everything else is just crap. Um, and I tend to be that way sometimes still. But as a kid, you just kind of want to hear what you want to hear,
Exactly.
and the appreciation for all types of genres and different types of music doesn't come till much later. So, but yeah, I mean, it was just a lot of really old, like, Al Martino and Frank Sinatra and stuff like that my parents used to listen to around the house.
Do you have any siblings?
I have an older sister. She's 2 years older, but we're completely different people. She is very, very much a Hispanic girl. She listens to the Latin music. She's, all her friends are Hispanic. Like, we're night and day. I'm definitely the black sheep of the family. To be honest, I remember as kids, I used to just torture her. I'd scare the crap out of her all the time. I was really big into practical jokes as far as, and not like, like I'm pulling a chair out from under you kind of stuff, but like just really setting up elaborate, scary jokes. And I wish I still did that. I wish I kind of still had the time to do that because I had some friends and we would just set up all these crazy, you know, gags and scare the crap out of her. And I remember particularly we had just seen The Exorcist, and and I remember at night as she was trying to go to sleep, I'd start making all these noises and I'd start talking in like the Reagan voice, like that really scratchy, scary voice, and just scaring the shit out of her.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of bring that up every now and then, and she's not too happy about that.
So, as you started to get older, what do you remember about the first local band you had ever discovered being down
You
there?
know, to be honest, growing up in Homestead, it literally was like being on another planet. I was so not exposed to anything that was going on north of me for a very long time. You know, I didn't really, you know what was going on. I'd hear bands locally, but a lot of stuff was just basically just cover bands, party bands, stuff like that. Um, I didn't really hear original music until I was in my teens. When I was old enough to go places and drive and do stuff like that. Um, Growing up in Homestead, there wasn't a lot of original music. It was a lot of, you listen to the radio and you hear stuff that was on the radio. A lot of the kids that were, musicians, a lot of older folks, they wanted to do just covers. No one was really doing anything original at the time. So really, honestly, the earliest exposure to any kind of local stuff was when I started getting involved in that local scene, when I started going to shows and going to backyard parties and stuff like that. So we're talking um, like early 80s, maybe. I started hearing rumblings about bands and stuff like that. I actually, my first year of high school, there was this guy who moved down to Homestead, uh, John Gilpatrick or Kilpatrick, can't remember. This is so many years ago. This guy was from up north, and he was just like this cornucopia of punk rock. He had all this stuff, and at the time, I didn't really hear any of that stuff. Like I wasn't the only thing I had heard up until that time, which was I'm talking like 1980, 81. Was like the Ramones, like the major label stuff, stuff that would be easily accessible at record stores. We only had one record store in Homestead. It was called Merlin's Music, and they sold a lot of just commercial radio music and a lot of classic rock. I guess at the time it wasn't classic; it was just what was rock at the time. So they really weren't selling a lot of that, like the Ramones and the Clash and stuff that was on, the major labels. But this guy John, really just exposed me to a lot of great bands, just stuff that to this day I still love. I did really like Alice Cooper at the time. Um, Growing up, I listened to a lot of radio because that's really all you had at the time, or records. But I did listen to a lot of Dr. Demento, and which I just, as a kid, again, going back to this horror thing, I always kind of, saw them together. I always saw, horror and music just kind of being like this, symbiotic relationship. And I remember watching, a cartoon. I don't know if you've ever seen it before. It's called The Groovy Ghoulies. It was
Yep.
a cartoon that was on Saturday mornings, and it was that was the perfect blend. You had these monsters who were in a band playing scary music, and to me that was exactly what I wanted to hear. And then of course stuff that I would listen to on Dr. Demento, you had Screaming Jay Hawkins, and then you had, Phil Harris and all those old classic, novelty, Bobby Boris Pickett, stuff like that, Screaming Lord Sutch. That's the kind of stuff I was really like kind of, you know, leaning towards at the time. And of course, I was still listening to a lot of the Beatles, and it was just a little bit of everything at the time. But yeah, no, Alice Cooper, as far as like the horror related stuff, I think I would have to say that that's really one of the only mainstream horror themed artists that I really listened to at the time. Now of course there's so many to listen to and so many to choose from, but at the time you really didn't have a lot of that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And what about just hangouts? Because I imagine there were malls and movies and movie theaters you could go to as well. So, do you remember some of the malls you were frequenting and maybe one of the early horror movies you saw when you were in Miami at one of the theaters down there?
I remember, well, there was a movie theater in here in Homestead. I can't remember what it was called. So I used to hang out with my friends there. There was like a little plaza, and there was a theater there, which also had an arcade. So we used to hang out there a lot. Uh, and I also hung out at the skating rink, the roller skate, because I actually worked there. That was my first job. I worked at a roller skating rink for 5 years. But then there was Cutler Ridge Mall, which also had a movie theater and an arcade. So yeah, I remember going to the movies a lot because I've always just really loved the movies, any kind really. But one of the earliest movies I recall, horror movies I recall seeing in the theater, uh, was where I went on my own. Was probably like, I want to say something maybe like The Omen, or like one of those like late '70s ones, because my parents wouldn't take me to the movies when I was a kid. Um, so a lot of the stuff I saw as a small child was just on TV. Uh, but stuff like Phantasm, I remember watching Phantasm in a theater and just being scared, man. I don't know, like something about that movie. And again, it's a very low budget movie, but it's just as a teenager, as a young kid, I was just really, it impacted me.
I know
Something about that.
why. I know why.
What's that?
Angus Scrim, the tall man.
Angus Grimm, and it's funny. I actually had the pleasure of meeting him once, and he was so different from what you see him in the movies. He was just such a gentle, sweet man. It was really funny. It was such a contrast to what he plays in the movies. But yeah, stuff like that. That was early on. But once I was old enough to drive myself or catch the bus to the theater, I was just there all the time. And then, of course, VHS made everything accessible. Where you can just go rent a movie and watch whatever you wanted at home. So that was very convenient.
Do you remember one of the early horror movies you rented on VHS just because the cover caught your attention?
Oh my God, you're testing me, man. Honestly, it was probably some schlocky '70s movie or something. I don't remember. Um, but yeah, because I would just go to the video store and just rent like 4 or 5 movies at a time, and just binge watch whatever I could. Um, but yeah, it was I would have to say probably like, because I always want to kind of see like the classics. I always, because I read a lot. I used to, and in fact, I still have a lot of the books I had when I was a kid. Um, so I would read about movies like Psycho and Night of the Living Dead and all these like classic horror, black and white movies. And I think that was probably some of the early stuff I rented. Um, the over the top gory stuff I didn't start really getting into much later because I did grow up watching all the classic stuff, and that was really always what I kind of like, gravitated towards, like all the Universal classic stuff. Um, but yeah, I do appreciate a lot of the more contemporary stuff. I was never a big fan of like the Jasons and like the Freddys and stuff like that. I do love the Halloween, the John Carpenter original. That one and the sequel to it, the second one. Those are two of my favorite movies. But again, stuff like The Exorcist that I mentioned earlier, and The Omen, and just a lot of that stuff is what really I just loved.
Yeah.
I love a good story, and whether that involves a lot of gore or not, I'm in. Also if it's an entertaining movie. I don't like movies that have gore for the sake of gore, like no storyline. It's just like killing, killing, killing. I just that for me, I don't really get into that.
As you were growing up and you were starting to become more aware of the local music scene, were the people that were around you or you were getting to know, did you find they were also into the same things that you were into, or were you learning different things just from hanging out with different people?
Well, once I mean, once I caught the bug to play music, because I always loved music as a kid, and it turned out that one of my school, like one of the kids I went to school with, they were these twin brothers, and I didn't know this for years because we lived like a street over, and we went to the same school, elementary school, you know, all that stuff, and I never knew that they were musicians. Like their dad was this really, you know, really great like Latin music musician. And so at an early age, he taught one of the brothers to play bass and the other brother to play drums. I never knew this for years. It's just like they never mentioned it, you know? So when I was about 13, I found out that he played bass. And I was always like a big Paul McCartney fan. So, you know, I wanted to learn to play bass. So he gave me lessons. He taught me. He gave me my first bass as a gift. And this was when I was around 14 years old. I played in bands during high school, but it was mostly cover bands. Again, you know, in Homestead, nobody was really doing original music. So once I kind of started venturing out to shows and meeting people, yes, I did meet people that were into the same kind of movies and same kind of horror stuff that I was into. But I also started getting exposed to punk, like more like local on a local level. So, you know, doing the, like I said earlier, backyard parties and stuff like that. And, you know, there's a lot of bands who, you know, to this day, I'm still really good friends with the guys that were in those bands. At the time, they weren't really playing shows at venues because there were really weren't a lot of places to play. You know, you had some of the stuff up north, like, you know, Flynn's, and then you had like Finder's Lounge and places like that. But, you know, at the time I was too young, you know, and I just started. I actually went to a couple shows before I actually got into the scene with me playing music with that guy John, who exposed me to all the music. We actually went to, and you know, and if I told you the dates, I wouldn't even remember because it was so early on. I did catch most of the Misfits set at Finder's Lounge. That was huge for me because at the time, you know, I hadn't really heard much of their music. But the fact that they were doing like the horror thing and they were mixing it with the punk, to me, that was like mind blowing, you know, because I had up until then, around, I would say 1982, 83, I received a cassette copy of Hell Comes to Your House. I don't know if you're familiar with that comp.
I am.
It has, you know, Social Distortions on there, 45 Grave, which that was the start of my love for 45 Grave. I absolutely love that band even to this day, you know, Christian Death, stuff like that. But yeah, I started meeting bands on a local level, bands like, you know, like Genetic Mistake, which actually was one of Fausto from Load and Juan Montoya from Torch and from Moondestroy. They were in that band at the time. This is like mid 80s, I would say. You know, bands like Indecision, Misguided Youth, The Violent Deed. These were all bands that were just like this really tight-knit group of friends who, you know, I kind of came in as an outsider because they had all gone to school together. They had all known each other. And here comes this kid from Homestead, just kind of like, hey, guys, you know. But even before then, right before then, actually, I started playing bass because in Homestead, there weren't really a lot of punks. But then I started going to shows and kind of meeting people and hear say, oh, I live here. Oh, there's this guy that lives there. So I met these guys in Homestead. And we did start a punk band. It was the first punk band I was ever in. I switched over because my initial instrument was bass. So I switched over to drums. And I played drums for this band. We called ourselves The Accused. But then we found out that there was an actual band called The Accused, so we had to change the name. But we just did covers, you know. We were doing punk covers. We were doing Dead Kennedys and Sex Pistols and all that kind of stuff. And that kind of started branching out as far as me meeting people and getting to know other musicians and stuff. So that was really, really helpful. And like the guys in the band were really like the, you know, typical like, you know, anarchy and punk rock and, doing the whole like by the numbers thing. So they actually called the band N.R.K, which is like anarchy. It's kind of silly, but it was funny at the time. And so I think we only played like one or two shows, man, to be honest. And then it just, everybody just kind of lost interest. But it did kind of help me establish a lot of friendships with people further north of Homestead. Again, the guys like I mentioned, Juan and Fausto and Ren Acosta and all these guys that I ended up meeting through these backyard parties and going to Cameo and stuff like that. It's at the time it seemed like I did not miss one show at the Cameo. It seems like I was there every weekend, and it's just so many friendships were built and connections. I was playing in that band, but then once we stopped playing, I just wasn't really looking to get into another band at the time. I was just kind of doing my own thing and just working and just trying to get through life, But I was wearing an Agnostic Front shirt one day at a mall, and this kid comes up to me and says, "Hey, do you play bass?" And I go, "Actually, I do." Wow. And it turned out that was Mike Donovan, the singer for Not Dead Yet. And they were looking for a bass player. So I met up with the guys, and they were just really cool kids, and then everything just kind of fell into place. And so I was playing bass in Not Dead Yet. And
now, although that's not a horror band, but the name Not Dead Yet, I mean, could signify like a zombie or something to that effect. So did that connect with you at all, just because the name was Not Dead Yet?
Well, I want to say, again, my memory is a little fuzzy. I want to say the name didn't come in until after, because I think at the time they were kind of trying to establish themselves. They were trying to kind of get a lineup together. So I want to say maybe the name came after the fact, after I joined. I don't remember who named the band or how that came about. But I was happy with it because, like Not Dead Yet kind of lends itself to, like our t-shirts had like skulls on it and stuff like that. So it was, it was right up my alley. And at the time Mike was the singer, but he eventually went off to college and I took over as the singer. So I played bass and sang. So when that happened, I did kind of, start putting a lot of my horror influences into some of the lyrics, but not just straight up horror. Like I didn't want to, because none of the other guys were really into it. I didn't, I didn't want it to become like a horror punk band. We were just doing hardcore, it was just like this fun, silly hardcore band, and then, at the time, I think who's like Andrew, the original drummer, was in the band at the time, Brian, the original guitar player, and Mike and myself. But then Mike and Andrew left, and we got Chris Schneeberger on drums. And so we were a three-piece for a very long time. And then eventually, Brent Wilson from Chocolate Grasshopper was our guitar player. So and then Brian left, but that was really cool because Brent and I actually became really good friends. And again, we played shows with Chocolate Grasshopper, and to this day they're still one of my favorite local bands, Miami bands. And I will always talk highly of them because they were one of the first bands I saw, local bands, that I was just really like, these guys are just, not only were they really cool guys, like on a personal level, but I just loved the music that they were doing. They weren't doing the hardcore stuff. They weren't doing like the screamo stuff, like the yelling, typical, the punk rock. They just had really cool, heavy melodic songs. And I just loved that. And so, I became friends with them, and me and Brent, I talked him into joining the band, and he did. And then it was great having him in the band.
Now those guys were also skaters. Were you a skater too at that time?
I was never a skater. That was, the thing is, I came in, I was always a couple years older than those guys. Um, so I just growing, like I said, growing up in Homestead, there really wasn't a lot of that. There was no punk scene, no skater scene. Um, there was really a whole lot of nothing in Homestead at the time. It still kind of is, it's still that way. But no, I never was, got into skating or any of that stuff. I toyed with surfing for a little while because I made a friend, this guy who was in the Air Force. He was from out of town, and we would drive up to like Sebastian Inlet, and we'd go surfing every now and then, but not enough for me to get good at it. But yeah, that's about as close as I got to skating. Um, but no, like I said before, they were all friends who had gone to school together, grew up together, and I always kind of felt like I was, like this older, outsider kind of guy. Until, they all kind of welcomed me in and stuff, which is great. And I love those guys to this day. They're just really good friends of mine. Um, and
You played with
I
them
don't
at the
talk about
Cameo too, right?
we did. We played the Cameo with Not Dead Yet. We played the Cameo, I would say two, maybe three times. Um, but definitely two times because I have pictures and video to remind me of it. um, but yeah, definitely two times, maybe three. But we did so many like house parties and backyard parties, and that's really like where the scene kind of thrived at the time, because back then there was a lot of scene building and bands helping each other out, and there was a lot of kind of, you know, incestuous kind of like, this guy's in like three bands and that guy's in four bands, and so it was a lot of like crossbreeding with bands, and but everybody helped each other out at the time, and it's I kind of miss that because I've noticed as time's gone on, you don't see a whole lot of that anymore. Um, and this was early on in the Miami punk scene. Um, but there were other bands like Morbid Opera and stuff like that, that you would hear about. And, of course, Morbid Opera, with that name, I was always kind of like drawn to that as well. Um, I don't think I ever saw them live, but I did used to have like somebody like made a cassette copy for me, and I used to listen to that.
Right.
So that was cool. But there were a lot of bands at the time, and we're talking like, mid 80s that I just absolutely loved. Like Amazing Grace was one of those bands that I just absolutely fell in love with the first time I heard them. And the Drills were another band. That was another band that I just couldn't get enough of. Um, so yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of but again, living so far south, I didn't I didn't really get a lot of that until much later.
Did Not Dead Yet record anything for like a demo cassette or any kind of recording in the
We
studio?
did. We did. At the time, I guess a lot of it was DIY, and we did record. We actually recorded two cassettes. Our first cassette we recorded uh, at this place, and I want to say it was called Third Eye Studios. And it was owned by these two brothers. And I think Chocolate Grasshopper recorded there, Foie recorded there, like a bunch of the local guys were recording there. So we recorded our first cassette there. And I mean, I guess you could say it was a demo, because at the time we were just like, doing copies, cassette copies of our own in our house and stuff like that, and giving them away and stuff. So that was the first one we recorded, and then about a year later, we recorded a second one, and that one we recorded at Natural Sound Studios, back when they used to have a location in, I want to say Hialeah, up in that area. Um, and that was the quality on that one. Obviously, was a little bit better because it was an actual recording studio, and that recording was done with Brent. Was also on that recording. So Brent Wilson from Chocolate Grasshopper is on a lot of those recordings. And that's really it. That's all we did. We just recorded those two cassettes.
Did you guys ever have like a last show anywhere?
Uh, I don't think we did like a final, like a farewell kind of thing. One of the last shows that Not Dead Yet played, it may have been the last show, but I don't know if it was the final show. We played with I want to say it was the Doldrums or maybe the Roids. We played at the Def Club up in North Fort Lauderdale. And that was probably one of the last shows we did. But yeah, I mean, to say if it was a final show, I couldn't remember. I couldn't
Right.
remember. Maybe Brent remembers, but I honestly don't remember. Or Chris might remember as well, but yeah, I don't remember.
Do you remember how many times you may have played or shared a stage with the Roids?
Not too many. I think we played maybe 2 or 3 times with them. Again, they were more like Northwest Palm area. We were way south. So our paths really didn't cross a lot. And at the time when you're that young, driving from Miami to West Palm seems like you were driving to another state, So it just felt really far. And so we didn't really play a lot up north. We mostly played just like Miami shows and a lot of like, skate ramp shows. We did a few of those because our guitar player, Brian, actually had a half pipe in his backyard. So, we did stuff like that. But yeah, not too many shows up north. And I would say maybe 2 or 3 with the Roids.
Now, your next band that you were in after Not Dead Yet, I believe, was the F-Boyz, the Fuck Boys.
It was the F-Boyz. That's right. It was the F-Boyz.
Far removed from horror, as far as I know. I don't think there's any horror-related songs,
Yeah.
but maybe there is. I don't know. You play drums, but you were not the original drummer for the F-Boyz.
I was not the original drummer. In fact, you just had Aesop Decker on your show 2 episodes ago. I was not the original drummer. You're right. Aesop was the original drummer, and he was getting ready to leave to go to college in San Francisco. So the way I kind of got involved with them was they were friends with the guys from Quit, which, by the way, I kind of didn't mention this, but right towards the tail end of Not Dead Yet, right after Chocolate Grasshopper split up, I remember getting together with Andre and Brent for like one practice. We got together, and I guess we were going to try to start a band or something, but it just never went anything further than just one practice. But I did meet the guys, through Andre. I met the guys from Quit, which was way before Quit even started. And I remember we were all at a show at Cameo, and I want to say it was the Agent Orange All show, and we were just like inspired. We were like all sitting together. We were like, we need to start a band. So we got this idea to just get together, and we started like just doing covers. We were doing like Descendants covers and stuff like that, and we actually played one backyard party. But at the time, like Not Dead Yet was still together, and I just kind of didn't really. I felt like I didn't really fit in with those guys because, again, they were a little younger. They were into the whole skate thing, and I really wasn't. And I still had Not Dead Yet at the time, so I just kind of wanted to focus on that. But eventually they kept going, and they became Quit. So technically, I was like the original bass player singer for Quit, like way, 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 way in the early days,
That's good history
anyway,
right there.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. So anyways, going back to my involvement with the F-Boyz, they had contacted Andre to see if he wanted to play drums for the F-Boyz. But Andre, obviously he was doing his thing with Quit. Andre was like, talk to George. George plays drums as well. So somehow we got connected, and I went and tried out, and I started playing drums for the F-Boyz. And that was fun. Those guys were a lot of fun. Matt and Scott, the guitar player and bass player for the band, they were brothers. And those guys were huge into like the Misfits, and so they were already kind of into that whole horror thing. And some of their songs did lend themselves to to like horror themed lyrics. They also used to I don't think it's still around, but they back then there was like that stupid trash magazine called Weekly World News. Remember that? With like the Bat
course,
Boy and
Bad
all those,
Boy and
right?
Alien Head Found. Yeah, of course.
Right. So like I remember Matt would just go through those newspapers and find these crazy stories and like write songs about these stories. Like one was like, you know, my daddy was a mummy and stuff like that, you know, and it's just like he would write these really cool songs and they were just a lot of fun. So I just kind of like immediately took to these guys. And it was just one of those bands that, you know, just chaotic. It was always like the shows were insane. Seaweed, the singer, and I'm sure I know that Aesop talked about a lot of this stuff when he did his show, but you know, they were just performers, man. These guys would put on such a show. Seaweed would do like 6 costume changes during a set. You know, he'd like go backstage and come out with like a different costume, and it was just insane. One time he walked out on stage playing a big like swordfish as a guitar. You know, he just found this big like stuffed swordfish and put a guitar strap on it. And he's like playing it like a guitar. It was just nuts. It was insanity. In fact, we played one show, and Joey Seaman was in a band, the Naughty Puritans at the time, which were a great band, by the way. They were in a band at the time, and we played a show at FIU, at the college down here. And in the main building, there was like this pit, and the band set up in the pit, and we were performing there. And when it came time for us to play again, you know, Seaweed and his just insane stage antics, he smashes a TV on the ground, like just at the beginning of the set, and from there on, it's just nuts. And then he's got baby powder and he's spraying it all over as like, you know, to create fog. And it was just crazy. And so it was really funny because I guess at the time, during our set, some of the kids from like the Christian club happened to be walking by, and like the next day there's an article in the newspaper, the school newspaper, with our picture on the front page saying like satanic worshiping band or something or other. And it was so funny because we're like so far removed from any of that stuff, but they thought we were doing like satanic rituals at the college. And it's so fun. I say, in fact, Joey, I think he has a copy of that, and I still have my copy of that newspaper, but I don't know if he mentioned that in his book or not. But
you also have that show. You have that show archived too on your YouTube channel.
I do, actually. That's right. You're right. You're absolutely right. I do have that show, and if you watch it, you can see it's just harmless fun. It's just craziness, you know. But yeah, they took it the wrong way, and I guess the Christian students saw that, and they were just like, yeah, these guys are just worshiping Satan.
And when you think about that time period, a lot of people may not have had the whereabouts to bring a camcorder or even have one. So who was filming a lot of that stuff? Do you remember?
Well, it was my camera, and, you know, God bless my mom. I bugged the shit out of her to buy it for me, and she did. It was one of those big, giant, like the ones you pop the VHS. And I mean, at the time, that's what was available. So I just carried that thing with me everywhere, you know? And so, and this was right around the time that the like Not Dead Yet was kind of towards the end of that. So I was able to film a couple of those shows, and I think I've got like a Quit show on there somewhere, and the Chocolate Grasshopper show, which I have also archived on YouTube. But yeah, I just, you know what? It wasn't like I was doing it to like, okay, this is, you know, for posterity. I didn't think that, you know, I was young and I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was just like, oh, this will be cool to watch back later, you know, like we'll play it back and just have a laugh. So I just brought my camera everywhere. And so I would just videotape our shows, and I've got a bunch of F-Boyz shows on video. And in fact, I was going through some old VHS tapes last night, and I found this videotape. It's a 2-hour long, and I actually was talking to Aesop about it earlier today. It was basically us documenting our trip, like when the F-Boyz moved to San Francisco, and it was just that whole drive, and it's a lot of just us sitting around just talking shit, but it's a lot of funny stuff too, and it's nice to have because Maddie passed away. I just found out today is his 22nd anniversary of his passing, but it's nice to have because there's a lot of Maddie on there, and Maddie was just a genuinely cool guy, just really funny and just really smart. And when I told Aesop I found that tape, he was just so excited, So I'll be posting that on YouTube soon as well. But yeah, at the time I just didn't think about it. I was just like, oh, let me bring my camera just in case. So yeah, that F-Boyz show at FIU is one of those crazy ones. But going back to Aesop leaving the band and me taking over, I was in the band. I want to say my time frame's a little fuzzy. I want to say maybe about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. I was in the band, maybe less. I mean, honestly, I don't remember. We did record an EP, which was not released while I was in the band. It was released after I left. But it ended up being the Rock and Roll Problem EP. So some of those songs on that EP are actually me on drums. But yeah, that videotape that I was telling you about, the road trip, that's got some really funny, experiences. And unfortunately, some of the stuff we didn't actually capture. For example, this is a great story. We're driving cross country, and we're in 2 cars. This is like the dead of night. No lights on the road. We're in the middle of Texas. Nothing to be seen. Just mountains and whatnot. Just desert, And this tour bus just whizzes by us. And we catch the title on the top of the bus, and it's Alice Cooper. We're like, no shit. Alice Cooper just drove past us, So we didn't think anything of it. We just, kept on driving. And then eventually, like way down the road, we see like one of those like little rest stops. And I'm not talking about the big fancy ones you see here on the Florida Turnpike. I'm talking a bathroom and some picnic tables. So we see his bus, and we're like, no shit. This is out in the middle of nowhere. Nothing is out here. No lights. It's just dark. So we pull over, and we start banging on his bus door, and we're like yelling, Alice, come on out, come on out. And I mean, he didn't come out, but because I can't imagine seeing 4 weird looking guys in the middle of the desert banging on your bus door, So there is a little clip of that on the videotape where you can see the bus and it says Alice Cooper on the top, but us like banging and screaming and stuff, like no one, because all 4 of us are doing it, so there's nobody really to videotape it. But that was a fun trip, man. That's just memories, and it's, you hear about bands that go on the road and do all kinds of stuff, and they're doing all kinds of crazy shit. But seeing that video, you realize it's not all exciting. Some of it's kind of, just kind of blasé, and you're just kind of sitting around doing nothing, cooking beans on a Sterno can, Did
you guys play any shows while you were heading towards California?
We did not, but we were offered the show. Going back to the Alice Cooper thing, I'd like to think that Alice Cooper was kind of like our guardian angel, because it just so happened we pulled into that rest stop to bang on his bus and stuff. But then when we were getting ready to leave, my car broke down. So, I look at it like this. Had we not stopped, it would have broken down in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, So at least we had this rest stop with, shelter and a bathroom. And so we kind of spent the night there. And then the next morning, because we had 2 vehicles, we took one of the other cars, and we were trying to find this one town. It was the only town anywhere near us. It was about 10 miles off the beaten path, in the middle of a valley, in the middle of the desert. It was a small town called Ira Ann, Texas, right? And it's literally like something you'd see in a movie. You pull in, there's a main drag, there's buildings on either side, and that's it. right? So we get there, and miraculously enough, there's a Ford dealership there. And my car was still under warranty. So we had it towed to the dealership, but because they were so off the beaten path, um, they couldn't get the part to replace it for like 4 days. So we were stuck in this town for 4 days. And so by the time we were like within an hour, everyone in town knew we were there. They were like, "Oh, you guys are the boys that broke down on the highway, right?" We're like, "Yeah, that's us."
Where'd you sleep?
So anyway, we slept. It's funny because like for 3 nights we slept. We would drive back to that rest stop and sleep on the picnic tables. the town had the smallest hotel, like this really small hotel. So the last night that we were in town, we decided, you know what? We're just going to splurge and we're just going to get a hotel room so we could take proper showers and, do the whole thing. And of course, we're there and we get a knock on the door in the middle of the night, and it's the sheriff. And he's knocking on the door. So we open the door and he's like interrogating us. And he's like, "Are you boys here selling drugs?" And we're like, "No, man." We're like, "Here, we broke down our cars." But anyways, going back to your question regarding whether we played any shows or not, we were offered a show in Ira, Texas to play at their community center for all the kids. And we almost took it. We were almost going to play, but then the mechanic was like, "Hey, your car's ready." And we were like, "Later." So we just literally got the fuck out of Dodge.
I mean,
it was
after 4 days, that's a lot of time to want to just, you're ready to go at that point.
But it's funny because a lot of that stuff is on that videotape. Wow. So like I said, I'm going to be posting that soon. So it's it was definitely an experience because it was something I've never experienced since before or since then. It was just like this Twilight Zone episode where you're in the middle of this town,
right? And
everyone knows you, and there's nothing else around for miles. It was a little creepy at times, but it was definitely an experience, man.
Did you have any paranormal experiences on that trip?
We did not, but we almost died because a deer jumped out in front of us in the middle of the road, like in the middle of the night. And Scott was driving at the time, and he just started swerving. That was scary. But no, as far as paranormal experiences, no, we didn't see anything, experience anything. I wish we would have. We drove through New Mexico, and I'm thinking, Area 51 the whole time.
Yeah.
But no, unfortunately, we didn't get to see anything.
Especially in those smaller towns, you never know what's out there.
You never know. Yeah. It really was like an episode of the Twilight Zone. Yeah. And, and it's funny because like the name of the town, Ira Ann, it was named after the founders, Ira and Ann. So it was like the smallest town I've ever been in my life.
So when you got to California, I don't know if you were there that long, right?
I was not there that long. We got there and, we settled in. Thankfully, we had Aesop was there, and he's actually the one that convinced us to move out there. Because at the time, we're talking 89. This was when, the Berkeley area was booming in San Francisco, and you had all these punk bands and all these metal bands. Like the scene was really, really strong at the time. So Aesop just kind of convinced us, "Hey, you guys got to move out here. This is where it's happening." So that's what made us move out there. And thankfully enough, we were friends with the guys from Stevie Stiletto and the Switchblades, and they were living there at the time as well. So the first night that we got there, we actually stayed with them. And then the next day, it all happened really fast. The next day we found an apartment. Like the day after, we all found jobs. I mean, this is like unheard of, and so, yeah, but the weird thing was, again, we were pretty established here in South Florida. We could play a show down here and there'd be tons of people here, but, going to a different state, especially one on the other side of the country, no one knows you. So you're essentially starting from scratch. And it was just really hard trying to book shows because no one had heard of you. No one knew who you were. And at the time, and I don't know if it's still like this now, there was a lot of the pay-to-play situations. So they would essentially say, "Here's 20 tickets. you got to sell these tickets. If you don't sell these tickets, you got to pay for these tickets, you know? So it was just tough. I think we maybe played a couple shows. But it was tough because, again, these were guys that they had known each other for a long time. They had been playing together before I even joined the band. So I really love those guys. They were just great guys, but I always kind of felt like I didn't belong, you know? And so that was always in the back of my mind. And then, of course, the big earthquake hit in '89 in San Francisco. And that kind of, made me reconsider a lot of things. And so I just really wasn't happy with what was going on at the time. We weren't playing shows. That was the main reason I wanted to get out there. And then the earthquake hit, and I was like, you know what? I prefer hurricanes to earthquakes, so because you can see those things coming. So right. I left the band, but it all worked out in the end because Aesop was already there, so he just rejoined the band, and then they just kept going from there. Then I came back. What's that?
Did your family ever share any of their opinions on you doing that move out there for that time that you did?
At the time my parents were divorced. I hadn't spoken to my dad in years. And, my mom is the typical like Latin mom where she's very like protective, and she was always worrying. And she really was not happy with the idea of me moving cross country. But she was always supportive of what I did. So she understood that I really wanted to go out there, and she knew how much, I love music and stuff. So she was supportive. But yeah, aside from that, I mean, she was, she really was too thrilled with the idea. But yeah, she was very happy when I came back.
I bet. So what was it like coming back to Miami after that short move to California?
It was, I kind of, even though I wasn't out there a long time, it took a little bit of adjustment because I really loved it out there, man. To be honest, if I could live out there again, I would. I really loved it. So I just, my, frame of mind, I just had to really readjust to living in Miami again. And I kind of told myself I didn't really want to do anything musically for a while. I just wanted to kind of focus on getting, my life back on track and working and stuff like that. But of course, I can't stay away from the music. So, eventually I started playing. I met up with the guys from, my old friends, Fausto and all those guys. They were in a band at the time. I want to say they were called Medfly. I think that was the name that they were going by, and they had a different singer. But he wasn't working out, so they got rid of him. And so I started singing for the band, and that turned out to be Jobbernowl. So we started playing. We changed the name to Jobbernowl, and so that was that. I was back in another band.
When it came to what you were going to be doing in that band, I mean, you've played bass, played drums, vocals. Did you have a preference in what you were doing at that point, or was it just whatever the need was?
Honestly, I've always loved making music, and to me, it's always been like whatever I need to do it. My first instrument was bass, like I mentioned. I played bass for about 6-7 years, and then I just kind of self-taught myself to play drums, just because I really liked it, and I got really good at it. But honestly, I've always been the kind of person that like, oh, you need a drummer? I'm there. You need a bass player? I'll do it. I've never really, I'm kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. I don't really consider myself, a musician. I just love playing music. I consider musicians guys like Dan Bonebreak and Juan Montoya and Russell Mofsky. Those are musicians. To me, those are guys that just absolutely just have the talent and the passion to do it, and they're just amazing musicians. So to me, it's just always been like, oh, you need a singer? Sure, I'll do it. Let's go. Let's do it. And I'm all in. But no, I never really had a preference. I enjoy doing it all. I'm better at some of it than others, but I just like making music. So yeah, I started singing for Jobbernowl, and that was cool. That was fun, because I'd known Fausto for a long time. I knew Omar, the bass player, because he used to play in Quit, and Quit and the F-Boyz used to play shows all the time. Um, and so I knew Omar from those days. Scott, the guitar player, I didn't really know. He was transplant. I think he was originally from Chicago, and he was in Miami for college. So I didn't really know him. But the other guys I'd known for years. So it was, I didn't feel uncomfortable going into that situation, and we just worked really well together. Um, yeah, but I mean, it seemed like right away we all clicked and we just started playing shows like immediately.
Where was one of the earliest shows you can remember playing with Jobbernowl?
One of the earliest shows, I want to say, there's so many. We did play a lot of shows. We played Churchill's. We would play Washington Square a lot. We did the Thrash Can, which at the time was on Miami Beach, and I think at the time Rabbi was booking shows there. So we did a bunch of shows there. There was a place called the what was it called? The Junkyard. We played a couple shows there. But honestly, our first show, I want to say maybe might have been Washington Square. I could be wrong. It might have been at the Junkyard, but we did play shows with Quit a lot. Because I guess our styles kind of lends itself to each other. And we would play shows, like we played with All a couple times when they came down, because they were good friends with Quit. But yeah, we played a lot of shows, man. It seemed like we were playing Washington Square all the time. So
This is also like the turn of this is now the early 90s, right? 90,
early
91,
90s, yeah.
92.
Jobbernowl was 90. I think the band was together from like 90 to 92, so we were around for a couple years. And in that time, we did record. It seemed like we recorded a lot. But in hindsight, like going back and thinking, like looking at the stuff that we recorded, it really wasn't a lot. It was just a lot of repeated releases. Like we recorded our first demo cassette, and then we recorded our second demo cassette. But from that second cassette, a lot of those songs were repurposed. Like we had a 7-inch that was released on a German record label called Recordees. They released an EP, and they also released a compilation with one of our songs. But that was all stuff that was pre-existing, like it was all stuff that was on the second cassette. And then eventually we recorded some stuff for Dr. Strange Records, which was released on a comp. Oh no, actually the older stuff was repurposed for that as well. But then we recorded some new material, or we re-recorded the older material, but like new recordings of it for a 10-inch on Dr. Strange. But that was right around the time that the band was kind of at its, towards the end. And we were trying to schedule a tour. But at the time, Fausto was already kind of had like one foot out the door, because I think that was like at the very beginning when he was like kind of getting ready to do Load. And Scott was getting ready to go off to college, and Omar had like a techno kind of industrial band with his brother. So the band was going to break up anyways. And they booked a tour. It was, I think, a short, like a week, 2 weeks or something like that. And eventually I decided I didn't want to go on tour, because I just, I really love that band, but I didn't see the point in going on tour and promoting a band that was going to essentially break up when we got back. So I decided not to go. And Scott ended up recruiting one of his college friends to sing on the tour. But while they were on tour, they re-recorded the songs with him singing and submitted those songs to Dr. Strange. So the 10-inch actually has those recordings. But it's funny, because if you look at the artwork for the album cover for the 10-inch, it's got my picture on it. So it's
Right.
like, because all that stuff was already in print. It was already done.
How did that make you feel at that time?
Honestly, I kind of felt like it was done out of spite, because it was really, this is a band that I had put 2 years into. And you know, for something that they went to go do for 2 weeks and then the band was going to end, it just kind of seemed like they did it out of spite. Um, but again, you know, I don't know because I've never really spoken to them about it in detail. Like I still talk to Fausto every now and then when I see him around. Scott, I don't talk to at all. And Omar, I never see him. I rarely talk to him, but he and I still get along really well. I love Omar. He's just a really cool guy. But you know, honestly, it's like, you know, it's water under the bridge. I don't really think about it too much anymore.
Right.
But at the time, yeah, it did kind of sting. Um, but I don't really think about it anymore.
Sure.
So
Yeah, I can imagine it was more significant at that time.
oh yeah, at
Uh,
the time, yeah, it really did feel like a slap to the face.
yeah.
Um, Especially since we did record those songs and submit them, and then you know, redid everything again for no reason really, aside from just having the new guy, the singer, which he was just kind of like a fill-in singer. Um, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is, man. Just, you know,
How would you describe
band.
how would you describe the crowds for some of the Jobbernowl shows?
Oh man, some of we some of those crowds were really good. Like I remember playing shows at the Thrash Can, and again, it probably wasn't us. It was more so like the bands we were playing with. We did have a following, you know, we did have a fan base, but we would play shows with like Sam I Am. And we played one of the shows, a show with them, and man, that place was just packed. But like the crowd was great for us. You know, they really were into it, and we had like the big, you know, circle pits and stuff like that. But we had a pretty good following, and then to this day, I still have friends that tell me, you know, hey, you know, Jobbernowl is a really influential band to me. Like that's why I got into music. That's why I started playing guitar because you guys, and that's really good to hear. You know, because you know, I've never really looked at any of the bands I've been in as being significant. I just kind of saw it as like, you know, we're just another local band. You know, we're just a band playing music and having fun. So it's for me, it's nice to hear, but it's kind of hard to accept it sometimes. Like, oh yeah, your band really like inspired me, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, but I don't see it. You know, like I'm just kind of like, yeah,
It is nice to hear
yeah,
the impact something could have on someone else,
right,
and whether it was at the time or whether it was 20 years later.
yeah.
And some stuff maybe doesn't always catch on at the time. People don't get it, but then years later, it's like, oh, wow. I just discovered this, and this is pretty cool. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, it's
just
funny that you mentioned that because not too long ago I was contacted by this young kid. He must be 17, 18, you know, but I guess he just discovered Chocolate Grasshopper, and he was reaching out to me. He's like, "Oh, I heard you have a video," and you know, I'm like, "Yeah, it's on YouTube." So, but he's just like enamored by Chocolate Grasshopper, and that's cool, man, because like he's a young guy, and to see like this new generation of musicians and you know, music lovers that are now finally, and a lot of it, you know, is just kind of word of mouth, but also, you know, thanks to stuff like what you're doing, where you're kind of interviewing these old bands and exposing the new wave of the scene to all the stuff that came before, you know, and that helps out a lot. Because I mean, I've talked to people that don't really know, you know, some of the younger musicians that don't really know the history of
right.
South Florida or even Florida bands, you know, bands like North Florida and Central Florida. Um, but you know, thanks to stuff like what you're doing, and you know, thankfully people that have, you know, kind of archived like zines and videos and stuff through the years, it's, you know, we have to be thankful of that stuff, you know.
And thinking about this time, right? This is the early 90s. We've been talking a lot about what's been going on in Miami-Dade. Did you have any idea what was also happening in Broward at that time?
We I mean, you know, we had rumblings of a lot of the bands that were going on up there, like, you know, Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids. We had played a couple shows with them, but not up there. We played them like down south. You know, we would go to shows up north, but we didn't really play a lot up there. And I don't know why. In hindsight, I really can't say why. I think it was just, you know, I always felt it was a kind of like a different scene. Like in Miami, it was more like punk and pop punk and stuff like that. Whereas Fort Lauderdale seemed to me like it was more of like the heavier bands, like the metal bands. A lot of like the hardcore bands were up there. So I didn't really see it as something that would really lend to a show. Like, I couldn't really see us playing shows with them. So, but it's funny, going back to the F-Boyz, at the time, there weren't really a lot of venues either. Like we had Churchill's and a couple like little, small places, but we played a lot of metal places. Like we would play shows. They would book it with the F-Boyz. We would play shows at the Treehouse, which was in Hollandale. And it would be us and like 4 metal bands. And we just did not fit at all. But they loved us, man, because it's funny because at the time, this was when Metallica was first starting out. And, Metallica was really big with, with the Misfits, and they would wear the shirts. And so like a lot of the Metallica fans and the metal fans were kind of getting exposed to the punk. So, and, us being, big Misfits fans, we would play Misfits covers. And man, like they weren't really into our stuff, but we'd play Misfits covers and those metal kids just lose their fucking minds, and it was cool, and they kept asking us to come back. So I guess the venue liked us. But it was crazy. We didn't really, at the time, to me, it seemed like a completely different scene.
Right.
So we kind of stuck to what we knew.
And speaking of Hallandale, did you ever catch any shows at the Button South?
I did, but this was again like in the early '90s. I saw Danzig there. I think it was 1991. Social Distortion. I think I want to say the Circle Jerks, maybe. I could be wrong, but yeah, I went to but not often, but I did go there a few times.
You had places like Churchill's in Miami that was thriving at that time. And the next band that I think came up in your resume was Cell 63, right?
Cell 63, yeah. Cell 63 came about because this is Joey Seaman was in a band called the Naughty Puritans with Rob Coe. Rob Coe was the guitarist for the Naughty Puritans. And, the F-Boyz had played shows with them in the past, so we knew the guys from the scene and stuff. We weren't really super friendly with them, but we knew them. And I remember their drummer left, or something happened with the drummer, and they were looking for a drummer, so I kind of caught wind of that, and I kind of started playing with them. But at the time, they weren't, I think it was like the tail end of the Naughty Puritans, and I think they wanted to kind of get away from that. So we were starting a new band. But then Joey left the band because I guess he wanted to focus more on his art. And so we got Will, who ended up playing with, later, he ended up playing with the Holy Terrors. But anyways, Will joined the band, and then we got a second guitarist. And that's where Cell 63 came from. And that was, I would say that was around 92. 1992 is when that band got together. And let me tell you, man, like, I always admired Rob's songwriting. To me, he's always been one of these guys that really doesn't get the credit he deserves for songwriting, because he's just great at it, man. I don't know what it is. He's just, everything he's done since the Naughty Puritans, Cell 63, even, the Enablers. Now that he's doing the Enabler, like, he's just been such an amazing songwriter to me. And he really does, he doesn't get the recognition he deserves, because I think he's just phenomenal. But that band, man, it was great. And we got a lot of comparisons to the Replacements. And I can kind of see that, because like you can listen to the music and kind of hear it. But we also got a lot of comparisons to like Social Distortion, which that I never saw. But yeah, we did really well, man. We recorded our first CD, and I don't remember where, but we recorded our first CD, and off of that we started getting a lot of recognition. We started getting a lot of like college radio play, not only locally but like nationally. We started getting a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit. We started getting some mention in like the College Musical Journal at the time. But that was a fun band, man. That was a great band. And again, this is like the name of the band. Even like I suggested the name of the band because I'm a huge, like, anybody that knows me really well knows I'm a huge Oingo Boingo fan, which is completely out of left field. But early on,
not really though. Not really. Dead Man's Party. No One Lives
right?
Forever.
Yeah, a lot of it.
I mean,
yeah.
Oh, there's definitely a crossover with the horror.
Oh no, for sure.
Doubt.
Yeah.
So maybe that's.
But early on, before they became Oingo Boingo, they were called Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo. And Danny Elfman's got an older brother named Richard. He directed. You've probably seen it, a movie called Forbidden Zone.
Great soundtrack.
Yeah, great soundtrack. Now that's where I got the name Cell 63 from. If you look at the soundtrack, there is a track on there called Cell 63.
I was wondering.
Yeah. So I suggested that to the guys, and they didn't know where it was from. They just thought it was a cool name, so we stuck with it. And I like to do that. I like to pull names, and it's, surprisingly enough, a lot of the bands I've been in, I've named. So,
now that first CD from Cell 63, that was recorded at Sync Studios with.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Rat Bastard.
Yeah, Rat Bastard. That's right. You're absolutely right. That's right. We did record that there. I think what was it
like working with Rat Bastard?
He's definitely interesting. He's definitely got his own way of doing things, and he's a great guy. I love Rat. But he's definitely, he's got, when he sets his mind to something, man, that's it. And it was fun. It was interesting working with him. But yeah, he's headstrong. But yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right. I completely forgot we recorded that at Sync. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah. So was that the first time you were at that studio?
No, actually, we recorded, I think it was at a different location, because I think when we recorded with Rat for Cell 63, I think, I could be wrong, the studio was on Lincoln Road at the time. Because he did move the studio. Because I know I recorded there, I just don't remember which band. But we recorded previously the songs that I recorded with the F-Boyz. We recorded those songs with Rat at Sync Studios, which was in North Miami at the time, on 125th Street. So no, it was not my first time working with Rat. But yeah, I think those are the only two times I worked with him, was when we did the F-Boyz recordings and the first Cell 63 CD.
On the second album that Cell 63 put out, Once Upon a Drunk, going back to Joey Seaman, which, by the way, if you haven't checked out the episode with him and Chris Potash.
Oh, I have. I've watched it. I've watched all, the only one I haven't watched yet is the new one. But that's, yeah, I'm pretty caught up on all the episodes.
Yeah, that's definitely, so Joey Seaman actually did some of the artwork.
He did. He did some of the inner sleeve stuff. Which was really cool. In fact, I still have somewhere around the house the original hand drawing that he, like the original artwork that he did for us, that we used to put on the album, on the inner sleeve. I still have that somewhere around the house. So, but yeah, Joey did some of the artwork. In fact, going back to, because Joey and Rob were old friends, so we stayed friends with them. They're still friends, and I love Joey. I don't talk to him often, but every now and then, like, we'll send a message on like Instagram or something. I remember we played a show. Joey did individual drawings of all the band members, like these little cartoony caricatures of, and I still have those as well, of each band member. And so we played this one show at Mars Bar one time, and we actually created these life-size cutouts of those drawings and put them on the stage with us. And it was just super cool, man. I wish I had pictures of that stuff. We just never, you know. Um, but that was really cool. Joey did those for us as well. And oh, and another thing Joey did for us, we used to have a newsletter that we would mail out to like our, our fan base. And Joey would do like a comic strip for the back page of the newsletter. And so it was like a kind of like an episodic comic strip. So each newsletter was like a continuing story. And it was really funny. I guess at the time it was funny to us. And now in hindsight, I'm kind of like, we could have made some better decisions. But, again, this is all Joey coming up with the storylines. None of it was us. But there was this whole ongoing battle between us and like the guys from Holy Terrors, So it was like this really funny storyline of this comic strip. But yeah, Joey did a bunch of stuff for us, and then it was greatly appreciated.
How many times did Cell 63 and the Holy Terror share stages?
We played a few shows, not too many, but we played a few because again, we were very similar in style, and at the time there were a lot of bands that were doing, stuff that wasn't really within our, ballpark. So we would just play with them every now and then because I like them. I still have their 7 inches and everything. And Rob is a cool guy, and Dan, was a great guy, and Will, and even Sam. Sam was awesome. They were just really cool guys. Yeah.
Did Cell 63 ever play any shows outside of Miami?
We did. We used to play a lot of shows. We played Orlando a few times. We played Gainesville a bunch of times. We did a tour. We went up the East Coast and we played shows in where was it? I want to say we played a few shows in New York. We played like Myrtle Beach. We played North Carolina. But the funniest, the craziest, or the weirdest show that we booked is which we ended up not playing, and I'll tell you why. We booked like a weekender. So we played a show in Miami, then we went up to Gainesville and played a show there. And we had a show booked. Somebody got in touch with us and booked us to play a show in a town called Live Oak. Don't know if you've heard it or not. It's up near the Panhandle. So this guy told us, look, I'll book you. We'll pay you so much money to come here. All right, great. We'll play Gainesville, and the next night, the next day we'll drive up to Live Oak to play. So we get there, he gives us the address. And of course, this is like pre-GPS and pre-anything. You're just like using maps and, like just driving and hoping that you find the place.
It's a far drive.
That was a far drive. Yeah, that was a far drive. So we get there, and it turns out it's like some house out in the middle of nowhere. It's like literally like Deliverance out here, like, and it's just frightening, man. It's frightening. And it turns out it was like some guy's party. And it was I'm not going to lie, man. It was scary. It really was like straight out of Deliverance. And
that's perfect.
Yeah. But at the time, like we kind of had, like, we had a band meeting. We were like, guys, like, do we really want to do this? Like, do we want to play the show? Because by the time we get done, it's going to be super late. Do we want to be caught at night in this area? So we just decided, and thankfully the guy was like super cool with it. And we told him like, look, hey, this is just really not something we want to do. And, in hindsight, I really wish we would have, but at the time, we were just kind of like, whatever. So we ended up not playing.
What'd you do? It's a far
We ended
drive.
up not playing. We drove back to Gainesville and just hung out in Gainesville with our friends.
Wow. So you didn't do anything in Pensacola?
No, nothing at all. Yeah. Yeah, that was interesting. That was definitely something. I mean, it was this big stream in the backyard of the house, and it was just people in like lifeboats, and it was crazy, man. It was just like insanity. And I was just like, I don't know about this.
Wow. So you went back to Gainesville, which is
we went back to Gainesville. We drove back to Gainesville. Yeah.
Other side of the state at this point in North Central, right? So what was it like in Gainesville? How would you describe the scene from your vantage point, since you're more of a Miami guy?
Man, I'll tell you what. I love Gainesville. I love Gainesville. The scene was, I mean, it's not a big town. It's a college town, but they always had a phenomenal scene. Like even early on, like right after Brent stopped playing in Not Dead Yet, you know, him and a couple other guys that we knew from the scene, they went to UF. They went up to college to UF, and so did Jeff London. He went up to UF, so we knew people in Gainesville already, and this was right around the time, I want to say, that Brent was doing Radon, and again, two of my favorite Florida bands, Chocolate Grasshopper and Radon, both with Brent Wilson. Those are the two bands I will always praise, because honestly, those are my two favorite Florida bands ever. But yeah, it was always great, because like the bands were really good, and the fans, like the kids at the shows were just really super friendly, and you know, the venues weren't real big, so everything was always really intimate and just so much fun. I loved Gainesville. I was, you know, fortunate enough to play in Gainesville several times, not only with Cell 63. We played with Fay Wray, which this is coming up later. And I've always had a great time in Gainesville. Everybody was just so cool, so friendly. Yeah. I mean, I hopefully one day I'll get to play there again.
Did you play the hardback?
We did. That was the one place that we usually played at. We played. In fact, we played a show with Les and Jake one time there, and this was, I think, right before they hit it huge. And that was a fun show. There was a lot of people there, and you know, again, it's the hardback, and it was like this big, so it didn't really take a whole lot of people to pack it, but it was just the energy in that place was just off the charts, man. I loved playing there.
Did you ever get out to Tampa?
We did. We played a couple shows with Cell 63. We played a couple shows in Tampa. I don't remember where. I think we played like maybe 2 shows out there. And it was usually a band we didn't know. They heard of us, booked us, and, you know, we played the show and went out. And then, you know, oh, actually, no. There was one band. See, I'm glad. You got like little sparks of memories.
There you go. That's how it works.
There was one band from Tampa who I absolutely loved. I still love these guys, man. They were so great. The Go to Hells. Those guys were, man.
Yeah.
Not only were they just the coolest dudes, their music was so good. They were so great live. And we played a few shows with those guys. That's who we played with in Tampa. When I was in Cell 63, we would drive up there and play shows with them. And man, yeah, those guys were just balls of energy. Those guys were so good. And I think Hunter's playing with Down by Law now, I think.
Not sure about that, but I definitely do like the Go to Hells. Did you know about the Pink Lincolns too?
I did. Yes, I did know the Pink Lincolns. We never played with them though. And I never really got to meet them, but I did. I used to have the record, and I, you know, misplaced it, or somebody took it. You know, you lose shit through the years. So, but I did. I used to have the record, and yeah, I like them. But we never played any shows with them, and I never really knew them. I never really met them.
Right. It's across. Sounds like this was mostly the East Coast, right? With Cell 63.
It was the East Coast, you know, because we all had day jobs. Rob, our singer, was an English teacher, so you know, we really couldn't afford to take, you know, extended time off from work. So I think we did like a week or 2 weeks. It was like not a big deal. It was just basically of the East Coast. You know, we played like the you know, we played a few shows in Florida, and then a couple, like I think we played like 3 shows in New York City, and a couple other places like Myrtle Beach, North Carolina. But no, I think that was the one and only time that we left the state. And then we came back and did, you know, and then eventually the band just kind of fizzled. Like we were just, you know, things just really weren't working out, or to be honest, I don't remember what happened, but.
With the end of Cell 63, the next band that came in your list of different bands you played with was not really a far stretch from Cell 63 because it did have members of the band, and that would be Fay Wray.
Right, right. Fay Wray. Um, Fay Wray came about because Rob at the time was my roommate, and when Cell 63 ended, we were still roommates. And we had actually played a show, and I guess you could say it was like our farewell show, but not really. We played a show. I want to say it was at Mars Bar, and we didn't have a bass player at the time, and our guitar player wasn't in the band anymore. So Tony from Quit joined us, and Bobby Henyon, who was playing guitar with Quit at the time as well, they played with us, and we did like a final like Cell 63 show. And because of that, that kind of springboarded into, we really liked playing with Tony. Tony's just a great musician, and he's such a cool guy and so easy to get along with. So we decided that me, Rob, and Tony were like, let's start a band, and we were friends with Jeff. So Jeff was like, I'll sing, Jeff London. At the time, Jeff was living in Gainesville. So logistically, it was a little tough because, this was, again, pre-internet and pre any of that. Because nowadays, you can have an entire band living all over the country and still record and manage to get stuff done. At the time, that didn't exist. So we decided what we would do is we would write the music, Tony, Rob wrote most of the songs. And then we would, work on the songs, work on the music end of it. And then we would record them on a cassette. And Jeff had this little karaoke machine. So we would mail him the cassette. And then he would write lyrics and record his vocals onto that cassette and then send it back to us. And that's how we learned the songs. That's how we would like kind of work these songs out. But then, of course, if we had a show or something, we'd, whether it be in Gainesville or Miami, we'd drive up the day before, or Jeff would drive down the day before, and we would rehearse. We'd do a band practice, one, maybe two if we could. And so that way, at least we were, getting together on that end. But we did that for the entire span of the band, and it was interesting. We pulled it off. We were able to do it. Then we eventually recorded our first CD, the first record, which I think was a 10-inch on No Idea. But we done it as a cassette first, and we recorded that. What studio was it? We recorded it with Jeremy Dubois. I don't know if you know Jeremy. I think he had recorded a bunch of other bands locally. We recorded that first CD with him. And I can't remember what studio it was. But we put that out, and then eventually No Idea picked it up, and they released it as a 10-inch. And
Tapeworm?
And what's that?
Tapeworm Studios?
It may have been. I'm sure it says it on the credits on the record. I just don't remember. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it was Tapeworm. And so I was in the band. That lineup lasted for about a year. And then eventually the band just kind of stopped playing. And but then they picked back up. And then Andre from Chocolate Grasshopper and Quit started playing drums. And then Dan Bonebreak played bass for like the second, incarnation of Fay Wray.
Right.
And again, Fay Wray was another band that I suggested the name because, Fay Wray, if you don't know, she was the actress in the original King Kong movie. And I have a poster, which I still have, on my wall, and it says Fay Wray on it. And I suggested the name, and the guys were like, all right, cool, let's stick with that. So,
It's one of the greatest monster movies of all time.
It is. Absolutely, it is. Yeah. Yeah. But I still have that original poster where we got the name from. It's still hanging in my living room. So, and this was 20 years ago, something like that. So
yeah,
it's been a while.
You mentioned the 10-inch was on No Idea Records, which out of Gainesville. Pretty sure one of the first, if not the first 7-inch on No Idea could have been the Doldrums, actually. If memory,
You may be right. Yeah.
if
I know
memory's
that all that Gainesville stuff that was, that was coming out at the time was all through No Idea. It was Radon. Uh, what other bands were on there? Spoke. Um, if I'm not mistaken, was Spoke. You might know this, Jeff. Was Spoke on No Idea as well?
they were.
They were okay. Spoke. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a really funny story about Spoke. I remember those guys are so funny. Uh, they came down to Miami to play a show with us one time. This was when we were in South 63, or it may have been Fay Wray. And I was living in Kendall at the time, and I had this apartment. So I told the guys they could spend the night at my house, in my apartment. And Chuck from Spoke, like we were watching horror movies that night, and Chuck was just like terrified. He was just like a big chicken, man. He was like so scared. And I, again, going back to my practical jokes, I decided I was going to scare the shit out of Chuck. So my apartment had a balcony, and my bedroom had a door that led out to the balcony. And I remember Chuck was sleeping on the floor, facing facing outward towards the balcony, and he was just asleep, dead asleep. So I grabbed some like Halloween makeup and I painted my face up like in The Exorcist, The Exorcist that does like the flashes with the white face. So I painted my face white, and I just like lay down on the ground next to, like, face to face to Chuck, and I knock on the glass, and he wakes up and just like loses his shit, man. He's just freaking the fuck out, and it just scared the shit out of him. And it's funny because that same trip, for some reason, like in the middle of the night, we all had a craving for pie. We all wanted pie, So we go on this insane search for pie all over town. It's funny because I think John from Spoke wrote a book, and Amped, I think it's called Amped. And there's a section in that book where he talks about that search for pie in the middle of the night. And eventually we found this pie. And at that point, like, we didn't want it anymore. It was just like the point of like, we needed to find a pie. And we just devoured this pie, man. And
What kind of pie was it?
I want to say it was like a Dutch chocolate. I think we got it at Denny's or something. But yeah, man, that was a fun visit. Those guys were really funny. And all those Gainesville guys were like that. They had a great sense of humor, But that was a really funny Spoke story.
Yeah.
But those guys are cool.
I do like Spoke.
Those guys are cool.
Speaking of pie, if you had to choose, because we're this time of the season, pecan or pumpkin?
Man, I'm gonna have to tell you, Jeff. I've never been a pumpkin pie fan, and I don't know, man. Pecan pie just never sat well with me. So I have to deny both, man. I have to deny both. I'm a diehard chocolate fan. That's I've never. That's my weakness. That's my vice. It's anything chocolate. So if I'm gonna have a pie, it's gonna have to be a chocolate pie, man. And and I know people are gonna hate me for it, but it tis the season for pumpkin. But I'm not a pumpkin fan. Just I don't like pumpkin spice, anything.
Wow. No pumpkin anything.
Nothing. I like pumpkin. I like like that. A jack-o'-lantern. I love the imagery and I love pumpkins. I'm not a fan of the actual food product. It's just never done anything for me.
And when you've played some of the shows and these years we've been talking about so far, with any of these bands, do you remember playing any Halloween shows?
Yeah, in fact, we did play a couple shows. There was in Jobbernowl. Well, F-Boyz shows always felt like Halloween because we were always like, Seaweed was always in costume and it was always just the craziness on stage. So those shows to me always felt like just a Halloween like show, Cell 63. We played a show with the Genitorturers, and and I want to say it was a Halloween show. And they were always known. Genitorturers were always known for like throwing like meat and shit into the crowd. Well, we took a different route. Rob dressed up like a butcher, on stage. Like we had costumes, but he dressed up like a butcher, and with an apron, he had the little hat on and stuff. And instead of throwing the meat out into the crowd, he actually had packaged meat from the supermarket, and he was like marking down the prices and like throwing it out into the crowd. So it was just funny, man. It was just a funny show.
So
But
he was
even if
throwing,
they
was he
were-
throwing raw meat? Is that
yeah, it was, but like it's still like in the package. So,
well, I imagine, you're throwing it out to a bunch of sweaty punks. So what did they think of
Yeah.
that?
oh man, it was crazy. It was fun. Everybody was just laughing. It was just a lot of fun because the Genitortures were this they were this band where they had that image and they were just like intense about it, and we were not. We were just having fun and just being goofy, and so it was just kind of like this contrast between both bands, but everybody had a great time. It was just a fun night. And also we played with Fay Wray. We played a Halloween show at Tobacco Road, and we dressed up like the Village People.
Which one were you?
I was the sailor. I was a sailor. Jeff was the cop. I want to say Tony from Quit was the construction worker. And I don't remember who Rob was. I could be wrong about Tony, but Jeff was definitely the cop because I've got pictures to prove it. And I was the sailor. But yeah, we did play some Halloween shows, and even with later bands that I was in, I always try to book a Halloween show. Sometimes, unfortunately, the venue's not available or whatever the case may be. But I always try to, because to me that's a big thing. That's a big deal.
Yeah, of course.
Halloween, even if it's not on Halloween, at least if it's Halloween, around the time of Halloween,
Right.
I always try to book a show. Oh, in Jobbernowl, we played a Halloween show. But we dressed up. There was a local band at the time called Forget the Name. And
Yep.
It wasn't Forget the Name. Was it Forget the Name or Coral Gables? There was a band called Coral Gables.
Both of them.
And I don't remember which one was which. But I remember like the singer would wear like fishnet stockings and like big hats and stuff like that on stage. So we dressed up like that band for a Halloween show at Churchill at Washington Square when we were in Jobbernowl. So
Did that band know?
But yeah, I can't remember if it was Coral Gables or Forget. It was one of those two bands, but I can't. Yeah, but it was really funny. Everybody got a kick out of it because everyone knew exactly who we were supposed to be as soon as we walked on stage. So. And
the band that you were dressing up as, they were cool with it?
They weren't there. Like we never, which made it would have been even funnier, I guess, or maybe not. Maybe they may have taken offense to it, but who knows? But yeah, I mean, I don't know if they ever caught wind of it or not. But yeah, it was people knew right away who we were supposed to be, so that was funny. But yeah, as far as Halloween shows, there's later bands we did play a lot of Halloween shows, but in regards to the bands that we have already spoken about, those are definitely the outstanding Halloween shows.
And if it wasn't a show that was around that time when you were just at home, it's Halloween, how were you spending that time? Were you dressing up and going out? Were you going to haunted houses, that sort of thing?
Well, I would, we would go to parties, Halloween parties, or if there was a Halloween show, if there was another band playing, we'd go, to see the other band play. I always try to do something on Halloween. In the past several years, though, like as I've gotten older, again, going back to the whole nostalgic feel of Halloween, and I remember the feeling I used to get when I was a kid, dressing up and going from house to house and getting candy and stuff like that. And it's not like it was back then, because back then it seemed like Halloween was way bigger and like more so for the kids. And I've always felt that it always should be. So, as I've gotten older, especially since I've become a dad, if I don't have something planned specifically for Halloween, like if I like going to a show or if a band I'm in isn't playing a show, I'm home handing out candy, man. I'll dress up, I'll put on a scary costume, I'll sit on the porch and scare the shit out of kids, but I'm handing out candy. I still dress up every year, whether I go out or not. I have to do it. That's my holiday.
Are you the house with the fun size candy or the full size candy?
No, I do the fun size, man. Like,
Okay.
it's I'm not, I'm not rich, so I'm not affluent. I'm not living in a fancy neighborhood. So, you're getting the bite size stuff. So,
There you go.
but
I
I do try to get the good stuff. I don't get, I try to get like the Snickers and
There
the
you
good
go.
candy, not like
Smarties.
Twizzlers or exactly Smarties. What the hell is that?
I do like
Like
Twizzlers, but
flavored
smart.
chalk.
Yeah, exactly. And they were really cheap. So that's why a lot of people gave
Oh
them out.
yeah, yeah. You can get like 1,000 for like $5.
There you go. You don't see those as much these days. So
You actually do,
oh,
but
do
no one buys it. Like no one gives it out because they know
right.
better.
They
And
know
they do
better.
sell it in the stores. They
They know
just kind
better.
of mix it in with all the other crappy candy. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Now the 90s have wrapped up and we're now in the early 2000s. And this is
right.
one of the bands that you were in that I would say out of all the bands, maybe the one I'm least familiar with, Torpedo Lucas. So what can you tell us about the formation of that band?
Torpedo Lucas. We were a three-piece band. Uh, I want to say it was a band I joined by answering an ad. I didn't know the guys previously. Like I didn't know them from the scene. They were just, we never crossed paths or anything. Um, but I may have answered an ad, and I started playing with them, and I really enjoyed the music. It was they were more like I want to say like a street punk kind of like Rancid type. I know Nelson, the bass player singer. He was a huge Rancid fan. Like Matt Freeman is you can tell by his bass playing. He was really influenced by Matt Freeman. Um, but we were very kind of like a street punk kind of band, like just a very influenced by that genre, that subgenre of punk, But we were only around for like a couple of years. We weren't around too long. In that short time, we went through three different guitar players. But Nelson and I, we remained friends, and he's just a really down to earth guy. I don't think he's playing anymore. He settled down, got married, had some kids and stuff. So I know he was playing jazz for a little while, like playing upright bass, doing some jazz gigs for a while. But I think that band, Torpedo Lucas, was his one and only punk band, if I'm not mistaken. But he's a great musician, like just so good. Like it was it. That's the one thing I'm really thankful for. I've had the luck or the honor of being able to play with so many great musicians and all these bands I've been in, man. Like just incredible songwriters and just musicians that I wish I could be as good as, But yeah, Torpedo Lucas was a band. We recorded a couple of EPs, so we were kind of like, in the grand scheme of things, we were just kind of like a little blip. We had our fan base. We would do pretty good at shows. Like people would come out to see us and stuff.
And
Yeah, I mean,
speaking of shows really quick, because a lot of those places that may have existed back in the 80s and 90s that you were playing at with the other bands you played in probably weren't around anymore, or if they were, they may not have been what they once were. So what were some of the places you were playing at with Torpedo Lucas?
Churchill's, the Churchill's, we played a lot of shows at Churchill's. There was this place that it wasn't around very long. That I forgot his name, Richard. I want to say his name was Richard. His dad owned like a warehouse, or it was like a storefront, but it was like empty. It was like a big empty building, and it was called the Alley.
Yeah, I remember
And
Alley.
he started putting on some punk shows, so we did a few shows there. And again, we played Churchill's a lot. We played I can't remember who was putting shows together, but we did a couple shows that there was like an American Legion. So like, it was one of those situations where you play where you could, because you can, because it was all that was there. we played one show at the Hard Rock Cafe in downtown Miami. We played a show there once. It was they did like a tribute to The Cure. So they had a bunch of bands, and each band got to play a couple Cure covers and then a couple of originals. So we did a show there, and that was really fun. But yeah, I mean, we would play wherever we could, but Churchill's was always the one place that was always there.
Yeah.
You could always rely on Churchill's because, you know, it was always open, you know, and you can easily book a show there. So that's most of the shows we were doing were there.
Were you older than the guys in Torpedo Lucas?
Maybe by a couple years.
Couple years.
You know, and that's the thing is I always felt like, you know, I was always a couple of years older than everyone else, you know, and, you know, to dispel the rumors that I'm a vampire or anything, I've been around for a while.
I mean, you could be.
And you know, thankfully, you know, or so I've been told I'm aging gracefully. So that's a good thing.
Do you have a mirror you can look in and we can confirm right now?
I maybe, but you know, somewhere in my house, there's a painting of me that's gradually getting older. So,
and speaking of vampires, really quick, you have to only pick one. Who is your favorite Dracula?
Oh man, my favorite Dracula. I have to go with Bela Lugosi because that was the first one that I saw as a kid. That was Bela, you know, Bela Lugosi. Now Christopher Lee was great. He just added so much to that character, you know, and he made him evil and he made him bloody, and Christopher Lee's, I would have to say, is my runner-up. But you know, Bela, for as downplayed as he, you know, played that role, he's always going to be my favorite because he's the iconic vampire. You know,
he definitely had the look for sure. Like if I was to imagine, like, what would this Dracula look like?
Right.
I think he fits it really well.
Right. Now I do love the Nosferatu character, the Nosferatu, his imagery, which again has been used for many movies. That same look, like even for the original miniseries of Salem's Lot. That same look, I've always really admired that look, and I like it because it does lend itself more to the horror of it. You know, Bela was great, and the original Dracula movie was, you know, a classic, but he wasn't very scary. You know, he was like this very handsome, distinguished-looking gentleman, and you know, a vampire needs to be scary. A vampire needs to be threatening. And to me, that Nosferatu, the movie, and that look is frightening.
Yeah.
You know?
And I felt like that's what the 80s took it to that next level of movies like Fright Night and The Lost Boys. Did you find that you were really enjoying a lot of those later movies that were coming out in the 80s and in the early 90s that maybe not Dracula per se, but with vampires?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite, you know, I guess contemporary, but I'm talking, when I say contemporary, I'm talking about like, you know, the 80s, 90s. Near Dark, to me, is just one of those great vampire movies, man, because they're not your typical vampires.
Right.
They're, you know, hold on. They didn't have the fangs. They weren't running around in a cape and living, you know, sleeping in coffins. Like they were just, you know, just badasses, man. You know, living in a camper and just, you know, looking like these insane homeless.
Yeah.
You know,
there was more realism to it. I felt like
there was it was very realistic. Yeah, like that. Their imagery and I love the way they kind of did the whole history of like, you know, these guys were around since like the old Western days, and this guy came around like in the 50s, and like so they weren't all from the same era. They were all from different eras, but they were all kind of, you know, living together in this camper. And I mean, it was just a really well written and well acted story.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those films that I can just watch over and over again and never get tired of it. In regards to like vampire films, you know.
Right.
But yeah, there's Lost Boys again. That's another a great one. I like the way that they made it fun. They were scary when they would turn into the vampires, but when they weren't, they were these handsome young dudes, and it definitely was of the era. It was of the of the 80s, and you can see it when you watch the movie. The clothing, Corey Haim's like brightly colored shirt, and it's very 80s, but it's such a great movie. But yeah, Near Dark is always going to be one of my favorites in regards to that whole genre, that whole era. Fright Night is another good one. But you're right, they did kind of like take it into the next level, because up until then, in the 60s, 70s, vampires were still doing the whole cape thing and the fangs, and and then the 80s just kind of took it, above and beyond that, with the prosthetics and the evil looking vampires,
It did.
And that's the way it should be. I mean, ultimately they're creatures of the night, and they turn into bats, and they need to be scary. So
definitely.
So that's definitely one of my favorites.
I think, just thinking about that now, taking it to the next level, what would be your most prominent horror related band, as far as I was aware of at that point? The Van Orsdels came after Torpedo Lucas.
And Van Orsdels, the way that came about, it was right after Torpedo Lucas broke up. I didn't want to get into a serious band again. I just wanted to have fun. I just wanted to maybe play a show here, play a show there. But I always wanted to do, for a long time, I wanted to do like a Misfits show, like a Misfits tribute show. I didn't want to do a band. I didn't want to have it like an ongoing thing. I just wanted to do like a one-off. But I could never find anybody who wanted to do it. So I just, I used to go to Guitar Center a lot, so I would hang out there sometimes. And I knew Brian, who was in a band called Underpaid, because Torpedo Lucas used to play with them. And so I knew Brian, and Brian, I think at the time, was working at Guitar Center. So I had mentioned it to him, and he was like, yeah, man, I'll do it. This is it'll be fun. So, and I said, okay, well, we need to find like a drummer, and we need to find a guitar player. Well, at Guitar Center, there was a drummer and there was a guitar player, which were friends of Brian's, which ended up being Todd and David from the Van Orsdel. So we did this Misfits tribute show, and it was a Halloween show. And we played the show, and it was just so much fun, man. And we had such a great time. And, again, up until this point, that was the closest thing I ever got to actually doing a horror punk band. And it's something I always wanted to do. I was always into horror punk. And then, of course, like in the 80s and 90s, when like psychobilly came into the scene, that was even cooler to me, because it was like, I grew up listening to a lot of Johnny Cash as a kid. And so the fact that you have horror elements and punk elements and rockabilly elements all wrapped together, man, that was like mind-blowing. And so I was a big fan of that stuff. So we did the Misfits tribute show. It was a band called the Brain Eaters. And we had a lot of fun. So after that was done, I spoke to Todd and Dave, and I was like, what do you guys think about like starting a horror punk thing? Like, like something that's going to kind of lend itself to that. And they were all in. They were totally up for it. And so, at the time, I guess Todd was kind of listening to some of the psychobilly stuff as well, but he was more into like death metal. Todd was always like a big death metal guy. And I don't remember, I think we may have found Bruno through an ad, the bass player, the upright bass, because, at the time, upright bass players playing that kind of music were impossible to find.
Right.
And we just really lucked out with Bruno, because we found him right away, and he was so good. He was perfect. He was exactly what we needed. He was so talented. And
did he love horror too?
He didn't. The guys in the band really weren't into like horror. I mean, they liked horror movies, but they weren't, into the, like me, like they don't have this kind of stuff around. So they weren't really into horror in that regard. They were, they liked horror movies and stuff like that. But the idea of the band, the concept of the band, they really liked. So we did it, and that's how the Van Orsdels came about. It was kind of like a springboard from that Misfits tribute show. And so we started writing songs, and I had the idea, which I can't remember what local band did it. It may have been Marilyn Manson, which, I remember before they were even a band. I had read somewhere that they were just getting the name out there and promoting the band and just flyering and stickering and just before they even played a show. So I kind of started doing the same thing. I started, I printed out a bunch of stickers and I started littering stickers all over the place and just getting the word out, like the Van Orsdels. And so by the time our first show happened, like we had a really good crowd because at that point people were curious. They were like, who are these guys? The Van Orsdels. We see their name everywhere. Like we hear they're a psychobilly band, but we don't know what they sound like. Let's go check them out. So our very first show was actually a really good show. We had a great crowd, and it just took off from there. It just got better and better.
Where was that?
That was early 2003. We actually started playing. We got together at the tail end of 2002. But we didn't, the band wasn't formed until like the beginning of 2003. And I think our first show was, I want to say April or May of 2003. Yeah. And we took off right away. And I guess, I don't know if it was the novelty of it, the fact that, here we are playing songs, about horror movies with an upright bass. And, at the time, people in Miami didn't know what psychobilly was.
Right. There was nobody doing that in Miami. I know there was a band in Orlando called Twisted Engraved.
Twisted Engraved. Yeah, but they kind of came a little bit after we did. Like it was very close. Very close. But they came in like I think a little bit after us, and we actually ended up becoming really great friends with those guys because again, we were the only psychobilly bands.
Right. There wasn't
at the time. I mean, there was a few other ones around the state, but they were like the big ones in Orlando, and we were like the only ones in Miami. So
yeah, I saw you guys really early on. You played at the South Florida Tattoo Expo in Coral Springs.
We did, yeah, very early on. Yeah, that was one of our first shows. We played there. That was the one and only time we played a tattoo parlor. I mean, a tattoo convention. Which I would have liked to play more, but it never happened. Now, the one thing that did happen to us was at the time it was called Screamfest, but there was a horror convention that started down here in South Florida, and I caught wind of it, and I was like, this is perfect for us. It's right up our alley. This is, horror, and they were really promoting the horror and the rock and roll thing. So I contacted them, and they booked us. I wanted to see if we can get on the bill, and they booked us for that first show, for that first convention. But then
I was there for that one. That was Implantation.
Right. But unfortunately, something happened a couple months prior to that, and we unfortunately had to cancel the show. We couldn't play. So, and it was heartbreaking for me, man, because I was so excited. This is like my element. This is my world, And so we ended up not playing that first one. But then time went by, and then I saw that they booked a second one. So I reached out again, and I was very apologetic, and I was like, I'm sorry, we couldn't play, but we had canceled with enough time where it wasn't a big deal. Like they weren't upset at the fact that we canceled. I gave them enough notice. So they understood, they were cool, and they booked us for the second convention, which we were able to play. And man, let me tell you, it was just, I loved it. It was, to me, it was the best thing ever. Because here I am in a horror themed psychobilly band, playing at a horror convention surrounded by all these famous horror actors, you know? It was a dream come true. And thankfully we did really well, and the people that ran the convention liked us. And so thankfully every year after that, up until the band broke up, we played every year. We were the only band to play every year. And you know, through time, I established a really good friendship with the owners of the convention, and so yeah, so every year we would play, and it was a big deal for us. That was one of our, you know, that's the one show that every year it was just like the highlight for me.
Right.
And in fact, one of the times that we played, Bill Heinzman, who was the actor who played the very first on-screen zombie in Night of the Living Dead, introduced us on stage.
Oh wow!
So to me, that was fantastic, man. Like having this guy who's iconic, and he was in makeup and everything. He was still in it. It was so cool. Like he comes out and introduces the Van Orsdels, and that was so awesome for me. But yeah,
did you get that recorded?
You know what? I did not. Somebody recorded that show, and I guess when they hit play or they hit record, they caught the very tail end of him walking off stage. So they didn't get the introduction, which sucks.
Wow.
But you know, but we did get the show. The show
Yeah.
I do have on video. But we didn't get that intro. But yeah, it was just a cool event, man. And I got to meet a lot of really cool people through that event.
And they were a lot different back then too, because now a lot of the conventions people dress up and it's very elaborate in that sense. Back then, you didn't really have a lot of that. People would just show up as is, you know. Maybe you have one or two people that might dress up like it's Halloween, but for the most part, you just be really casual. And you guys would stand out though because of just the way you were dressed, had that whole rockabilly vibe going on, a lot of the black, and you guys really stood out. Did you have people come up to you and connect with you at all, just wanting to like get autographs or anything like that ever happen at any of those conventions?
Absolutely, yeah. We had you know, the convention would provide a booth for us. So we had a booth there for the whole weekend, and I'd sit at the booth, and then, you know, we had shirts and CDs and buttons or whatnot. We had all our merch, and people would come up to us, man, and they'd want pictures and they'd want autographs. And it was cool because, you know, again, going back to what I said earlier, I never saw myself as being anything significant. You know, like I've always looked at it like I'm in this band, I'm having a great time, I'm playing music that I love, and, you know, if people love it, then that's great. You know, if they don't, that's great too, you know. But it was really cool to have people come up and say, hey, you know, you guys were great. Can I get your autograph? Can I buy your CD? Can you sign it for me? And so that was really cool, man. Like, you know, it was something I'd never experienced before. And the cool thing about the convention was, you know, it was a horror convention, but that convention specifically, which eventually changed its name to Spooky Empire, they lend themselves to a fan base of people that were just like partiers, man, like rock and roll people. And it was very like, you know, they married he totally got the idea of, you know, which was what I loved about it too, because that was my way of thinking, was like music and horror, man, together. Like to me, that's always been, you know, synonymous. So he saw it the same way. So he always booked bands, and he always, like, the crowd was always like all these like heavy metal kids and punk kids. And so, you know, going back to, like you said, that we stood out because we wore black, and so we really didn't, because everyone there was dressed the same, you know. And it was great because we all had like that one thing in common, you know, horror movies and rock and roll music. So, but yeah,
definitely a rockabilly vibe though, with like the long sideburns and the the flames on the shoes.
In that regard, we did stand out because all the other bands were either like punk or, you know, like industrial type bands and stuff like that. Like we did meet some cool guys. Psycho Charger, I don't know if they're from, I think, up north somewhere, like in Chicago area. They may be, I can't remember. But those guys were really cool. They played one time. And Ghoul Town from Texas, they're great too. We got to meet them. Probably in regards to the band, probably the best connection we made was Chris Grimley, which I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Grimley. He's an illustrator. He's an artist.
Yeah.
At the time, he was, he kind of had his little fan base, but he wasn't really well known. He was kind of like, starting out. So he was at, I think, at the first or second Screamfest. And that's when I first met him. And I just fell in love with his artwork right away. It's just really cool. It's very stylized. And so we became friends through the years, just from him being at the convention and whatnot. And I remember just, this was when the Van Orsdels were getting ready to record our first full length, because we had recorded an EP, but it was more like a demo thing. We did it like in Todd's bedroom, it wasn't like we didn't go into a studio or anything. So, the fact that we actually were getting ready to put out or getting ready to record an album on a record label that was actually going to get international release, I was like, we got to do something big. Like, I want to do something cool. So I spoke to Chris Grimley, and I was like, hey, how do you feel about doing our album cover? And he loved the idea. Up until then, he had never done an album cover. Now he's done a million of them. But up until then, we were the first band he had done an album cover for. So he jumped at the opportunity, and man, like, I absolutely love the art that he did for us for that album cover, the Miami Morgue Riot CD. And I really do miss that band, just because of the uniqueness of it, and like the fact that we did have a horror element to everything we did. All our artwork, all our merch was horror related, our shows. So to me, that was finally, I was like, after all these years, this is the band. Right. This is the one band that I wanted to do all these years.
And one of the bands that comes to mind, who I think started in the mid-90s from Cape Canaveral, is the Green Goblin Project.
Oh, yes.
You ever play any shows with them?
Yeah, we did play shows with them. Yeah, man, those guys are good. Those guys are, yeah, Christian and Brian and all those. Oh, man, yeah, that's right, Green Goblin Project. They were doing the horror thing too right around that time, even maybe before us.
Yeah, I think before.
But man, what a great bunch of guys. I still keep in touch with those guys. With Brian, we keep in touch through Facebook and stuff. But yeah, man, those guys, I don't know, that part of the state for some reason just had so much talent. Like there was Green Goblin Project, and then there was a Wolfie Lonesome band, and they were great too. Yeah, Green Goblin, man, those guys, we had a lot of fun shows with those guys. Like I said, being in a psychobilly band, it was kind of hard to book shows because, the punk bands that were around weren't really doing what we were doing. So the few that were, those were the bands that we kind of like gravitated to. We played shows with Coffin Caddies, we played shows with Green Goblin Project, and Twisted in Graves. There were a couple of other psychobilly bands, but they weren't doing the horror thing. They were just doing the psychobilly thing that we played with in Florida. But then, because of the fact that there weren't many bands down here, I had to start like bringing bands in. So what I started doing at Churchill's is I would put together these shows, what I called the Psychobilly Spook Show Saturdays. And it was like a monthly thing that I would do at Churchill's. And I would try to book like horror-related bands, whether they be local, statewide, or international bands, or national bands. But I would always have like horror movies playing in the background on the screens. I'd have like horror themed music playing like in between bands. So it was a whole theme night, and it was really cool. And, they did really well. But I started bringing in bands like the Coffin Cats from up north, bands like the Rockets and Calavera from California. So, the legendary Shack Shakers. So I was bringing bands because there weren't any down here to play. So, and also at the same time, I was trying to expose the South Florida area to psychobilly. Like I wanted people to see what the genre was, and that there are all these great bands that they've never heard of, and And so I started really kind of focusing on trying to bring those bands down. And then eventually, you know, it took off, and like Tiger Army and Necromantics and bands like that, horror pop started coming down. And so, yeah, so the genre did eventually become, you know, a lot more popular, and then got the recognition. And, but yeah, it was tough at first. It was tough at first because people, you know, I think people saw us as a novelty. You know, we were like this band that, you know, sang about horror songs and had an upright bass player on stage, you know, so.
And thinking about some of the songs in the Van Orsdels catalog, which were some of your favorites to play out?
Oh man. I really loved playing Swing and Wake. I loved playing Evil and 666 were some of my favorites. And yeah, and like TVO Go was a good one. That was a great like to start the set with, because everybody knew that song, and it was one of those songs that like the whole crowd could chant along with. So it was just a really good way to kick off the set. But those are probably my favorite songs.
Did you feel like the Van Orsdels was like the first band that you were doing vocals in, where you had that two-way relationship with the audience, where they were doing a lot more participation in the singing and that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah, no doubt. You know, other bands I've been in, you know, you have your friends and you have your fans that know the songs, and then you can look out in the crowd and see them singing along and stuff like that. But yeah, the Van Orsdels was the first band I was in where the crowd, it just seemed like a lot of the time, the crowd was part of the show. Because, I mean, I would be in their faces in the crowd, and the crowds were like, you know, right in front of me and just singing along with, you know, into my microphone, or people would jump up on stage and sing along with us. And it was so much fun, and there was so much crowd interaction. And I think that was the first band I was in where I had that, you know, connection to the crowd. And I loved it, and I miss it, man. I really do, because it's just, you know, there's no feeling like it. To me, it's such a rush to not only perform on stage, but to have that kind of interaction and that connection with the crowd.
And it looked like you're just having a great time, because you're so passionate about the horror vibe and just the music and all that. It was all just happening simultaneously, and you can just see it. You can see how much you were really into it.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, again, you know, to me, my greatest high is being on stage. It's always been, you know, performing live is just one of those things that I just live for. And the fact that I got to not only do that, but, you know, have the crowd be a part of what I was doing, to me, that was just, you know, it really was great. It's a feeling I can't even describe. And you know, and again, thankfully, with the Van Orsdels, I had a great group of musicians that were playing with me, because I don't think I could have pulled it off without these guys. You know, Todd, despite the fact that we all came from different musical backgrounds, you know, Todd was a metal guitarist. He still is. You know, he's a big fan of metal music. He was not playing the stuff that I was into. Same goes for the drummer, Rich, you know, his influences were bands like Tool and Trivium, and he was doing that kind of stuff, you know, like that prog metal kind of stuff. And Bruno did come from a punk background, but he wasn't into like the horror stuff. But for some reason, it just worked really well together. Yeah. Like all those different influences and backgrounds, it just came together, man. It was just perfect.
It was also the first band too where you changed your last name to more of a gimmick now, you know, right? To match the band. So did a lot of thought go into you doing that? Because you've maintained that for ever since. So
yeah. Well, it's funny because when we were trying to come up with a band name, me and Todd were actually driving down the road, and we were just trying to think of band names, and we drove past, you know, I try not to, you know, mention it too much because like we almost got in trouble for it. But we drove past the Van Orsdel funeral home. And so it kind of like clicked because we both looked at each other and were like, we're a horror band. Here's a funeral home. Let's call the band the Van Orsdels. and right away that was it. We christened the band Van Orsdels. So we decided that we would do like the Ramones. The Ramones all did, Joey Ramone, we were like, let's all christen ourselves Van Orsdels. So we did. So everybody in the band took the last name Van Orsdel. And it didn't matter who was in the band. Like, later on down the road, we'd switch, musicians. Guess what? You're a Van Orsdel now, and it was just a name that through time and through, our growing fan base, people got to know us as that, even though they knew it wasn't really our last name, it was a band thing, but it just stuck. And to this day, people that have known me for years, even before the Van Orsdels, call me George Van Orsdel, because it just kind of stuck.
Right.
And it's a lot easier to say than my actual real name, which is Graquitena. So,
a little easier to spell.
It's a lot easier to spell, yeah, definitely. Especially if you see it spelled out and you try to pronounce it, you're never going to get it right. So it just stuck, and I've been using it since. Like on social media, I still use Van Orsdel as well, but like on my Facebook, I have my real last name as well. I have them both on there. But I mean, most of the people just know me as George Van Orsdel, so I just kind of, whatever. Like after the band broke up, I just kind of kept it, and people still call me, George Van Orsdel. They'll call me GVO because that's what they used to call me during the band. So people will see me, hey, GVO.
Did anyone from your family ever make it out to a Van Orsdel show?
You know what? They never did, man. They never did. Regrettably so. Like my sister never saw me play. My mom definitely never saw me play. I have, nephews, and they never saw me play. So no family member ever saw me. I mean, they saw videos and stuff online and stuff like that. Like, but they never made it out to a show. I wish they had,
Right.
Because it's still not too late for some of the family members, but like, my mom passed and stuff. So like, she's never going to get to see me perform, which, I wish she could have. That would have been great. Because I know she was very proud of what I did, the stuff I did. She was always very supportive of my music. So, and she always encouraged me. So that was nice.
Did you guys ever have the opportunity to open up for any touring bands as the Van Orsdels?
Yeah. We played for a lot of bands. We played with a lot of bands. We played with the Necromantics a couple times. We opened up for 45 Grave, which was a dream come true for me because I was such a big fan. I had been a big fan since like 82, 83. So to actually play a show with 45 Grave, to me, that was heaven. I was on cloud nine.
Did they play Party Time?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. The only thing I wish, the band at the time, it was Dinah Cantor, the singer, Dinah, was only the only original member. So the band didn't have the same feel or sound, right. But still, it's 45 Grave.
It's the closest you're going to get, dude.
yeah, that's it. And it was really, it was just, she was a really nice lady. And I picked her brain for like hours. So it was just really cool to get to hang out with her and talk to her.
When you picked your brain, what were some things you were talking about? What would you ask?
Just seeing like stuff that inspired her, and like what it was like back in the early days of the 80s, the 80s California punk scene, and stuff like that. And it was just, she was just such a nice person, so friendly and not scary. Which you would think, she's like this horror queen, and she was just really down to earth. Who else did we play? We played with the Quakes. We played with
that must have been fun to play with the Quakes because they're one of the OGs of the psychobilly genre.
At Churchill's, they were really just really good band, man. Really good band. I didn't really get to talk to them much. Maybe it was just they felt like, I don't know. They probably get to talk to so many people while they're on tour. They probably just want to detach or whatever. But I didn't really get to talk to them much. But yeah, they were fun to play with, man. They were they're one of those legendary psychobilly bands. The same goes for the Necromantics, Who else we played? Yeah, there's so many bands we played with. It's just hard to keep up with. but yeah, I think with the Van Orsdels, that was the one band that I was in where we did get to have the opportunity of we played with Mad Sin, which is another legendary psychobilly band. That was the one band that I did get to play with a lot of national acts, international acts as well. With older bands, we did do some opening slots, but not as many. We got lucky every now and then. We would play with somebody from out of town, like with Jobbernowl. We played, like I mentioned, Sam I Am. Fay Wray, I want to say it was Fay Wray, maybe Cell 63. We played with Archers of Loaf. That was cool.
Yeah.
And F-Boyz, we played with all a few times. Big Drill Car, that was cool. But yeah, no, with the Van Orsdels, we definitely that was like blew the lid off of it. We played with a lot of national acts.
Did you guys tour?
We did one again. We did like a short East Coast tour. We played Boston, a few shows in New York. We played Virginia Beach, Georgia, a few shows in Florida. Can't remember where else. But yeah, it was just like one of those like really short, excursions. We just went up and came back down. Because again, we have jobs. So
Right. How was the reception in some of those other places? Because again, it's not like your typical, punk rock. So what was the reaction like?
It was hit or miss. It was hit or miss. Like Boston, we did well because they were kind of, more aware of the psychobilly scene. So that was a pretty decent show. The shows in New York, we did well because again, it's New York City, so they have a lot of exposure to that kind of music. But the shows that we did in Virginia Beach, not so much. We played a show in where was it? I can't remember now. We did one show and it really didn't go over well. Like there's just not a lot of people there. Philadelphia. We played Philly. But we had fun. We met this guy who was an opening act for us. Toothless George. And, he was toothless. But he was like a one-man band.
He has to be toothless with a name like that.
He has to be toothless. But he was really cool, man. He was a one-man band kind of guy. And he was just really nice, just a cool dude and just a lot of fun. But that show, yeah, there wasn't a big turnout for that show. But Georgia was good. Georgia was really good. When we played Atlanta.
What was the situation with the rest of the band at that point?
Well, at that point, like the original members had pretty much gone already. And I was very, very close to just calling it quits. But then I was contacted by some guys that were fans of the band. And they had said, I love the Van Orsdels. Don't give it up. Let's keep this thing going. I'll play with you. So I ended up getting essentially a whole new band, a new drummer. Actually, Dave, the original drummer, David, he recorded on the first CD, on the first demo, but he left shortly after, and then he was replaced by Rich. But then when the second incarnation of the band happened after that hiatus, Dave came back for a little while. So it was Dave, and then Patrick was the guitar player at the time. And then we found this guy, Eric, to play. And then Eric was eventually replaced by Steve Satch. But yeah, these guys convinced me. They're like, let's keep this thing going, man. Let's keep going. And so we did. And, because I was very close to just throwing in the towel. And so we kept the band going. And I'm glad they did. I'm glad they talked me into it because we played a bunch of great shows. We did, it was a lot of fun. The only thing I regret on that second half of the band, like when we started back up, was because at that point we were going through a lot of members. We went through a couple of drummers, we went through a couple of guitar players, a couple of bass players. We couldn't move forward in regards to writing new material and getting any kind of recordings done. Like we did manage to record one song for Cleopatra Records. They were putting together a psychobilly Christmas album. And they reached out to us and they were like, hey, you guys want to record a song? So we did. We recorded You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. So that was like the only thing we ever got done, like when the band restarted, but it was just, that's the one thing I regret is we wrote music. We just never got a chance to record any of it. And then the band eventually broke up because it got to the point where there was a lot of conflict within the band. For me personally, I felt like towards the end we were essentially just like a Van Orsdel's cover band, because we were just like playing the same songs but different guys, and that was also right around the time that my son was born. So I just had a lot going on, and I was just like, I'm kind of going to put this aside. I'm kind of going to, I'm going to be done with this because I think it ran its course and we did all we could do. And I just wasn't, at that point, I just wasn't feeling it anymore. I didn't really want to deal with all the fighting that was going on in the band. I felt like I was always the referee, and I hated being put in that position. So I just, I called it quits. I pulled the plug on the band.
And what happened after that? You maintained more of a solo.
I did. Right shortly after that, Cleopatra Records contacted me again because they, I guess our track, because when they released the Christmas album on iTunes, our individual track was doing really well, was selling really well. So I guess they reached out to us again because they were getting ready to do another compilation that was going to be Psychobilly Goes Pop. So it was a bunch of like modern pop songs, but done by all these psychobilly bands.
Right.
But at that point, I didn't have a band anymore, but I really wanted to just be a part of, getting something out there again. So I reached out to them, I got back to them and I said, sure, I'll be happy to do this. So I contacted Steve, the last bass player for the band Orsdels, because I can't play upright bass. That's the one thing I can't do. And Steve's phenomenal. He's such a great bass player. So I contacted him and I told him, listen, they want us to do another song for this comp, and it's going to be a pop song. So I decided on the Bruno Mars song, Grenade. So what I did is I essentially recorded all the tracks. I did all the guitar tracks, drum tracks, I did all the vocal tracks, and then Steve came in and just did the bass track. And so that's what I sent the label, and that's what was released. So that technically was the last Van Orsdel's release recording, because it was released as the Van Orsdels, but the band was pretty much over with at that point. But because I did that, I realized, I may not be the most talented musician, but I can fake it. I can do enough to get away with it. And so that gave me an idea because I was able to record all those tracks and it sounded pretty good. I was like, you know what? I do want to keep making music because it's something I'm always going to do. So I decided I'm just going to start doing like a solo project. And so I just started writing music and recording everything on my own here at home with like the most minimal equipment because I really don't have any recording equipment. It's all just super basic stuff. So I started recording songs and I started releasing them as the Family Ghouls. So my intention originally was to make a band, to have the Family Ghouls be a band. But then I just, what kept holding me back was, I kept thinking back to the Van Orsdels. Do I really want to get back into a situation where, there's a lot of arguing, a lot of fighting, and I have to deal with this and I have to deal with that. And I basically just swore off bands. I really did not want to play in bands anymore, but I wanted to keep making music. So essentially I just started writing songs and recording songs. And, it was kind of self-indulgent, it was stuff for me just to make me happy. And, but I would record a lot of songs. I did some cover songs, I actually recorded a couple of F-Boyz songs, but it was mainly just for me to have fun doing it. And so I did that for a very long time, and I still do every now and then. Right now, not so much, because I've got other stuff going on. But I did that for a very long time. Basically right after the Van Orsdels broke up, which was in 2009, was when I started doing that.
Was it just stuff you were recording at home? Did you get out and play any shows just on your
No,
own?
never played shows. I never did anything. What I would do occasionally is I had friends that were in a band called the Riot Agents, and they were friends of ours from the Van Orsdels days because we'd play shows together. And they knew I was like a big Misfits fan, and they were like Mo, the guitar player, the bass player, was he's a huge Misfits fan as well. So every now and then they would call me up and say, hey, we're going to be doing some Misfits songs at our show. Do you want to come join us? So I'd come up and I'd do a couple songs on stage with them. So that was a lot of fun, and I did that a couple times, not too many times, but that whole span between the Van Orsdels and since then, that was really the only time I did anything on stage. Everything else was just stuff I recorded at home, and just I would either post it to YouTube, or some of the stuff is on Spotify, so I just kind of got it out there. And I wasn't really expecting much out of it. I know that I don't really have a whole lot of followers, but then again, I really don't promote it a lot.
Right.
But yeah, it's just something for me to do and just to keep busy musically.
What's one of your favorite Misfits songs to perform live?
Oh my God. I would say to perform live, Halloween. Halloween. I actually have a recording of the Van Orsdels doing Halloween at Spooky Empire. But yeah, that's always been one of my favorite Misfit songs to cover, because it's a Misfit song and it's my favorite holiday, so you can't go wrong.
Right. But it had been a couple years, maybe even more so, before you got into your next band, which is what you are currently doing with Salem Slot Machine. Is that right?
Yep, Salem Slot Machine. That's the new band that I'm in now.
How did you, real quick, George, how did you know you were ready to get into another band after such a long hiatus away from being in bands?
There was a lot of head pounding, man. Because I basically swore off bands after the Van Orsdels. I told myself never again, and I was very, very happy just doing the Family Ghouls thing, because that was something that I can do on my own time. There was no time limit, no time frame. I can just do it whenever I wanted. So I was really enjoying doing the solo stuff. But then COVID hit, and that just complete isolation from everything just made me realize, I really missed that camaraderie you have when you're in a band, and that interaction that you have when you're in a band, But even then, once I decided, do I really want to get back into another band? There was a lot of back and forth, man. It really, I had to convince myself, to be honest. What really helped out was, and the weird thing is, I wanted to start playing again, but I wanted to start playing bass again. Now, mind you, I hadn't played bass in a band on stage for 35 years. So it was a really long time. So I was kind of hesitant about it. So I didn't want to jump in both feet first. I want to kind of ease into it. So I was looking through ads, and I saw an ad that was looking for a bass player. And they were hitting all the points, man. They were Misfits, the Ramones, the Clash. These are all these are all bands I love, So, and they were looking for an intermediate bass player who wanted to just play and have fun. So I was like, this is right up my alley. This is everything I want. This is everything I'm looking for if I were to get back into a band. So I answered the ad, and lo and behold, it was Mo from the Riot Agents who had posted the ad, who I was friends with, So that kind of made it a lot easier for me to get back into it, because it was like somebody I already knew, somebody I liked, somebody who was, I was familiar with his songwriting. So I got back into that. Now, he used to play bass in his old band, but now he was playing guitar. Now, with the current band, he's playing guitar. So I started playing bass, but it's been a rough go, man. Let me tell you, given the fact that I had to convince myself to get back into this, there's been many opportunities for me to walk away from it, because we started doing this back in March of 2023 is when I first started playing with Mo. Since then, we have had a really hard time finding drummers. We were, having issues with singers. There was just one hurdle after another, man. We just kept stumbling and stumbling. So what Mo and I decided to do, since we had the opportunity to still record regardless whether we had drummers or whatever, he and I decided we're going to record the songs that we do have. I'm going to play bass, drums, and sing, and he's going to play guitar, and we're just going to record and release these songs. So that's what we did. But in the meantime, we were still actively looking for members. So we went for almost a year with no activity in regards to playing live. But thankfully now, recently, we found a second guitar player, Mike, who's just so good. He's not from Florida. He's originally from Chicago, and he's only been living here a short time. But we got lucky with this guy, man. He's a gold mine. He's so talented. And recently we found a drummer. So we're actually finally, after a year and a half we're going to be playing our first show next month. But yeah, there's been many opportunities for me to walk away, man. And trust me, there's been times I've just stayed up at night telling myself, is this worth it? Do I really want to keep doing this? And I just, something about it, man, I kept sticking to it. And finally we're going to start playing the shows. And the way I see it is, honestly, with my history with bands and then all the years that I've been playing, I'm also getting older. I think this is going to be my swan song. This is going to be like my last band. And I truly believe that, because at first I didn't believe that. I was like, the Van Orsdels, I'm done. And here I am again. But yeah, I just, I truly feel that this is going to be my last band. So I'm going to try to give it my all. And I think that's why I've been sticking to it. And, I'll let it run its course and see what happens. And if it works out, great. If not, we'll see where it takes me.
When is the first show?
It's November 9th at a place called Eddie's Place. I think it's a bar in West Dade County. We also have a show booked up in December, up in Fort Lauderdale in the Deerfield Beach area. So it's slow going, we also we're all very busy people. So trying to book shows is a little tough. So we're kind of, the shows are kind of a little spaced out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a little scary because, like I said, it's been years since I've been on a stage with a band, which was the Van Orsdels in 2009 was the last show. But it's been 36 years since I've actually played bass and sang on stage.
Right.
So,
and that's what I was going to ask you too. Like, do you feel like in some way this is almost like starting over again?
It feels that way. It's almost like full circle, I started out as a bass player singing, and here I am again as a bass player singing. And yeah, it's strange. It's still something, I've been playing now with Mo for a year and a half, and it's still something I'm getting used to, like mentally, because it's just something I haven't done in so long. So I'm really looking forward to the show because, I'm super excited, but I'm also very nervous because it's something that is just, at this point in my life, it's a little unfamiliar,
Sure. Understand that.
But I think, given my history and given the fact that I do love being on stage, I think it's going to be okay. I think I'm going to be fine.
I think also too, one thing that I would imagine is a big part of this band is it has a horror element as well.
Right.
So how does that make you feel that you still have that connection with one of your true passions?
Oh, I'm elated because we went into this knowing this is going to be a horror punk project. And even though our music doesn't really sound like your typical horror punk, like again, going back to, people expecting you to sound like the Misfits, we really don't. There's a lot of elements. In fact, Mo's like he's like a big Iron Maiden fan, which, not to compare us to Iron Maiden because we sound nothing like them, but in the songwriting, that's always going to seep in, so we really don't sound like the Misfits. Yes, they're a huge influence, but our songs have some keyboard in it, so there's a little bit of everything, and I've been trying to, like, when people say, who do you sound like? I try to say, we sound like this or sound like that, but I don't think we sound like anybody, and not to say we sound original. I'm sure we sound like somebody, but there's so many influences, like, there's the Misfits and there's the Damned. I'm a huge, like, Glenn Danzig and Dave Vanian are my two idols. Like, I love those guys. Those are my two huge influences. So the Damned is, some of the stuff is influenced by that with the keyboards and there's a little bit of everything. There's elements of all kinds of stuff. But it's fun and it's horror and the songs are about scary shit.
Right.
So,
have you done a Damned cover before?
I have not. The closest thing I ever got to a Damned cover was, I have some friends of mine. They're in a band called Swift Knuckle Solution. They're out of Orlando. They're a great band. They invited me up to play to join them on stage, and we did a cover of a Damned song with them, and that was fun. That was a lot of fun. But no, I've never done a Damned song. I would love to.
Wow.
I would love to do,
just
Machine Gun Etiquette or, Love Song or something,
Just an idea. Just an idea, George.
Yeah,
considering that this could be the last new band that you're a part in, and you haven't done a Damned song with any of the bands you've been in, this could be the one.
This could be the one, yeah.
Because there may not be one after this.
No, you're right. You're right. This may be my one and only opportunity. So yeah, I mean, I would love to. Love to. It's just it's so weird because for me, anyways, like, Dave Vanian to me is such an incredible vocalist, and I don't want to attempt to even try to sound like him or try to pull off some of the shit he does, because to me, trying to sound like or trying to sing like that, I'm not going to do it. I know my limits. I can do Misfit stuff. I can cover Misfit stuff all day long. Not to say that Glenn Danzig's easy to cover, because, he does have a very powerful voice. But Dave Vanian, man, he's just so good. Like, his voice can go from harsh to super smooth. And, like, he's just got that crooner kind of thing going on. And I can't do that. I can't.
And you don't have to. You just do George Van Orsdel.
Yeah. I would love to. I mean, maybe I can convince my bandmates to do a Damned song.
But let me tell you, it's been great having you on, George.
Oh man, it's been great. Really, it's been great being on, Jeff.
Taking a really deep dive into your musical journey, what you've been doing from the very beginning, day one, all the way to the present, with us also discussing a lot of things related to the season, Halloween. Yeah. This was the Halloween special. I do have some quick rapid fire questions to ask you to kind of wrap things up. Now that we've completed the marathon of your career, and let's talk about some of those questions here. Now, these are all going to be Halloween related, horror related.
All right. Sounds good.
And first thing that comes to mind, rapid fire. So this word does get thrown around quite often, underrated. But in your opinion, what do you think is the most underrated horror film?
Oh, man. Underrated. I gotta give that one a couple minutes of thought, man. Like,
we can get back to that one if you want.
Yeah. I mean, going back to Near Dark, I mean, that's now I think people kind of know more about it, but for a long time, man, that movie was like, Near Dark, what? Never heard of it. I think that movie should be right up there with, like, the classics, man. It really should be. And it doesn't get the fame that it should get, like the popularity that it should get.
Right.
movies like, Pumpkinhead is another one. I mean, I know that now, again, everything's streamable now, so it's like, it's kind of hard to pick one. But at the time, like, Pumpkinhead kind of came under the radar.
It did.
No one really knew about it, but that's a great film too.
And I think there's a connection between Pumpkinhead and Near Dark. I think Lance Henriksen's.
Lance Henriksen, yeah, Lance Henriksen, who again I had the pleasure of interviewing Lance Henriksen. He was so cool. Yeah. Because that's the other thing I did on at the convention. Once the band broke up, the Van Orsdels broke up. I stayed on with the convention on a moderator capacity. So I was hosting and interviewing a lot of the Q&As. So yeah, I got to meet a lot of my idols, man. That was super cool. A lot of my horror idols, people I grew up watching,
Right.
That was really cool. So Lance Henriksen was one of them as well.
Nice. Yeah. Did you ever have a ghost encounter?
I did not. And surprisingly enough, I always get people upset with me about this. I don't believe in ghosts. Surprisingly enough, as much as I am into horror and spooky shit, I just don't believe in it. I believe that people believe. I believe, and to me, honestly, it's one of those things where I'll believe it when I see it. I've never personally had any supernatural thing happen to me, so maybe that's why I don't believe. But now I will say I do believe in UFOs because that I have experienced.
That kind of crosses over a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the supernatural, I see that. But
was that in Florida where you had that experience?
It was in Florida. Yeah, I was about 10 or 11 years old. Me, my dad, and a few of the neighbors in the neighborhood. We all witnessed this, and it's funny because you can actually look it up online, and it's one that's very common. It's like a series of lights in a V shape, and it just kind of floated and hovered there for about 5 minutes in total darkness. All you saw were the lights, and then it just disappeared. So yes, I definitely believe it would be incredibly arrogant for the human race to think that we're the only life out there, So I definitely believe in extraterrestrials.
Have you ever
no
any skunk ape sightings?
No, never had skunk ape sightings.
You never know. I mean, skunk apes known to roam the Everglades, and
and I live pretty close to the Everglades, so yeah. But no, I never had a skunk ape, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, none of that stuff. No.
What was one of your favorite? What was one of your favorite Halloween costumes you ever wore?
Oh man, one time I had this friend. We were kids, and his mom had taken this old this white shag rug. Speaking of Sasquatch, she'd taken this old beat up white furry rug, like a floor rug, and she made a like Sasquatch, like a Yeti costume for him, right? For my friend. And he just refused to wear it because he thought it was like the most embarrassing thing. Oh, my mom made a costume, So I was like, dude, I will totally wear this thing, And that was a lot of fun, man. I tell you what, it was like the hottest costume I've ever had on. But it was so much fun because I was like, again, me going back to the practical joke thing, I was just scaring the shit out of everybody, just jumping out of trees and doing all kinds of stuff. That was a fun one because that's one of those memories that kind of sticks out. Aside from that, I did a lot of, I did the vampire thing and, of course, growing up in the 70s as a kid, we did the Ben Cooper plastic mask with the rubber band thing. So I did that. But yeah, as far as memorable costumes, that Yeti one would have to take the cake because that's one that really sticks out in my mind.
One person to read a horror story, Vincent Price or Boris Karloff?
Oh, Vincent Price, no doubt. They both have, they both had incredibly distinct voices. And, not to take anything from Boris, because I have actually some spoken word albums with Boris. and his voice is just so cool, man. But Vincent Price to me is like the GOAT, man. He is the GOAT. In fact, my son's middle name is Price because of Vincent Price. And
Wow.
I'm a huge fan. So yeah, to me, Vincent's voice is just it's unmatched. And to me, I can listen to him recite a cookbook, you know. So, which he actually wrote. He wrote some cookbooks. But yeah, Vincent Price, no doubt, man, no doubt.
We talked about this a little bit earlier about giving out candy, but what is your favorite Halloween candy and what is your least favorite Halloween candy?
Okay, my favorite Halloween candy would have to be either M&Ms or like Hershey's bar, like especially Hershey's Dark. That's my favorite. Like dark chocolate that's my thing. Of course, dark. I love dark. My least favorite, oh my God, candy corn. Or remember those orange peanut shaped
Oh yeah.
squishy things?
They came in either the orange or the black wrapper.
Oh, those were the worst.
Yeah, they weren't that good.
And like Twizzlers, I'm not a big fan of Twizzlers, stuff like that. You know, like we mentioned earlier, the Smarties, man, that's just flavored chalk.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. But no, I mean, yeah, those are the ones I would have to turn away.
Okay. You mentioned the 70s a couple times and thinking about some of the most well-known and beloved specials when it came to Halloween. I feel like a lot of them came out in the 70s and the variety shows and that sort of thing. But there was others that were out, I think in the 80s and 90s too. So thinking about that, what's one of your favorite Halloween specials?
One that comes to mind, man, I remember watching it was the Paul Lynde one with Kiss. You know, that was a good one. That was a good one. But a lot of the ones that really stick out in my mind, because again, you know, I was a kid, I was young, were the cartoon specials. Like the Charlie Brown, of course, that's a classic, but that's, you know, that's everyone loves the Charlie Brown Great Pumpkin. There was a Fat Albert Halloween special that I've just always loved that one, man. That's one of my favorites. So yeah, it's the Paul Lynde would be like, as far as variety shows, that would be the one, and then the Fat Albert cartoon. That's like my favorite cartoon one. Yeah.
Last one.
Yes.
Describe what you would feel to be one of the most just downright scary situations. Not where you necessarily fear for your life, but you're just scared, like you're almost in a horror film. What would that situation look like to you?
I'll tell you, Jeff. So I would have to say like a serial killer or some kind of like life-threatening situation like that. That would probably scare the shit out of me.
So I think of like a movie like Jaws, for example, where
That's
not necessarily like the magnitude of that shark, but just a shark in general, because that is something that does in fact happen, or an alligator or something to that effect.
Yeah, that's a real life. See, that's something that can actually happen.
Right.
See, I would be terrified if I was in the water and a shark came up to me. See, that's something that is very, very frightening.
Right.
Now, you know, if I saw a zombie, like I mentioned, or a vampire bat or something with fangs, or like, that's not real. You know, I know the difference between what's reality and what's not. So it would have to be something like reality based for me to actually be scared. You know, like I see a cobra coming at me, of course I'm gonna be terrified and run the other way. So
or a skunk ape.
Or a skunk ape, correct. In a big furry carpet homemade suit.
Right. I appreciate you giving your answers to those questions, George. And we had to wrap it up with something Halloween to close it out. So, but again, just a real pleasure having one. It was a very fun episode
It was a lot of fun.
It definitely strayed a little bit off with the usual format, because a lot of what we usually get into is strictly just Florida music and what have you. But we definitely got into a lot of the Halloween vibe too. So
yeah. Yeah.
Really
It's what I
appreciate
live
it.
for, man.
I know. So, great getting a chance to chat with you today. And
Likewise.
as we get ready to close things out, I'd love to give you the last word to take us home. Any final thoughts, comments you'd like to share with folks out there? The floor is yours.
Uh, well, one thing I do want to say is, um, if you've ever thought about picking up an instrument, pick it up, learn to play. We need more musicians. Um, if you've got kids, encourage them to play, encourage them to learn music. It's so rewarding. And right now we're at a time where there's so much digital recording going on, so much, artificial music going on. We need more musicians, more talent, more real people on stages. We need more people working together, more bands working together. We're all doing this because we love it. There's no reason why people should be, arguing or trying to compete against each other. We're all in this because we love it. Don't give up music. Learn music. Encourage music, man. Make better horror movies. We're getting tired of the same ones and the remakes. Yeah, man. That's it.